mouth, the meditation of mine heart be acceptable in your sight. He is our strength and our redeemer, and it is in his name, which is his authority, that we pray, praise, proclaim, protect today's message. Amen. Hola, mi nombre es Kofi, ¿cómo está? Bonjour, je m'appelle Kofi, ça va? Ni hao, namaste, Osayana Ketubia, Ahaya, Nasi, Manut, Wagwan, Kimsa, Kamsamida, Aloha, Ciao, Ensemble, Akwaba, Wadase, Etesen. Jambo, Bimini Kofi, Neferaku Katana the Wewe, Boker To, Boker Tav, greetings, salutations, grand rising. Top of the rising to you, prayerfully your day is going well. Barakalat Shem Yechava, Anai Kofai, Chelit, Servants of Christ, Mashem King. Hello, everybody. Peace. I am Pastor Kofi, Pastor Servant of Christ, where we are always changing lives one mind at a time by being a voice of the voices and speaking the unspoken. We appreciate you all. Thank you for coming on in. Thank you for those who might be coming on over from Thursday Rising Bible Study, Thursday Rising Prayer, excuse me, session. And we thank you all for being part of the community, for being straightforward, for being faithful. Praise Yah. And we're thankful and grateful for another opportunity to come before you one more again. So, greetings to all once again. Hopefully, all is well with everybody. Thank you for being on. Everybody on all the different platforms, whether you're with us live, watching us later on. We're thankful, we're grateful, we're appreciative for yet another opportunity to come before you one more again. The jacket seasons have come out, so not too bad actually this rising, but go ahead and got jackets, stay warm, stuff like that. So time to start switching up, try to find the clothes that we're not usually wearing throughout the winter, through the summer and spring and even fall as it gets ready to go into winter for some of us. So hopefully, once again, all is well with everybody. We appreciate you so very much. And we hope that you guys are going to glean something powerful from today. Thank you once again for being on all the different platforms. And prayerfully, everybody can see and hear me all right. Yes, no, maybe so. Hopefully, you can hear and see me. Yes, no, maybe so. While we're getting ready to do that, we're going to go ahead and get ready for our Bible pledge. So if you put your Bible in your right hand or your device in the air, just repeat after me. All right, cool over there. Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and get ready to say our Bible pledge and jump right in and continue this series that we've been in. And while you're referencing Yahweh's word in whichever way you can, we'll just give a quick shout out to everybody. Peace to everybody. How you doing? How you doing, Sister Debarach? How you doing, Kalum? Is it Took Black? And thanks for the like, and thank y'all for the love. How you doing, big brother Charles, Double OG, Triple OG, Jacob, Olin Gerard, Jess Q, Big Will, Sister Joy, FWB Saint, Truth, MacBook, Marvin Badger, Rhonda Harper, Sister Sheila, welcome, and Double OG, Triple OG, of course, was first one up. How you doing, Brother Rodney? All right, everywhere. Where am I from? Honestly, where am I not from? Ultimately. If you're talking about my people, if you're talking about where I am, there's a lot of different places that we're from, grew up in, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I don't know if I have a place that I claim more than anywhere else or whatever. But I'm Yachad Sha'al, and for the purposes of today, that's always the main key on these live sessions is the prism we come through. How you doing, Sister Dawn? Alrighty, so welcome. Hopefully all is well. Shalom, Iron Grid out there. How you doing, my friend? Peace be upon you and everything that you guys are doing over there and going through. We're going to go ahead and get started with our Bible pledge, and we're going to jump right into the series. So if you can, you just put your right hand on the device, your Bible in the air, just repeat after me. This is my Bible. This is my sword. In this will I trust. For Yahashua is Lord. No sword of God shall ever be heard. For this is my Bible, and this is Yah's word. Hashem Yechavach. Aman. Which in Yahweh Shem, his name is authority. Let it be done unto us. Let it be so. Ashe. Aman. You may be seated to go back to what you're doing in the presence of the Most High Yah. How you doing, Sister Julie? Alrighty. So, just in case some of you are getting used to the schedule, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday we'll be on live. We'll be on live on all those evenings except for the weekend. So we'll be on this evening, tomorrow evening, Monday evening. We'll be on Thursday through Monday. For our regular schedule program. Also, those of you who are thinking about joining or would like to go through our, it's it's our equivalent to a new members class, right? Basically, we use it in the same manner persons use new members class. We call it the graft in session. Basically, based off of Romans chapter 11, where everybody, even including some Israelites who have fallen out the way and come back, needs to be grafted back in to a nation, to a community, to laws, rules, regiments, etc. And as we're forming a nation and getting closer and closer to doing more together on a daily basis, we give out sessions. So on Tuesday and Thursday the following 3 weeks, not this week, but following next week on Tuesday and Thursdays at 9 p.m. New York time, we'll do a Zoom session just for you all and for you that would like to redo it, or those who were part of this but haven't gone through it yet. It's an opportunity for you to go through training, to listen to what we believe, to not, to actually have it on Zoom where you hear it coming from my mouth. We go through about 50 different principles, 50 different statutes, if you will, 50 different things that we use for doctrine, for instruction. And so if you'd like to come on Tuesday and Thursday, starting next week for 3 weeks straight, we're going to try to do that quarterly. So, once every three months about, we're going to try to make sure that we do that for everybody. So if they'd like to ask questions, different things like that, have your voice be known, talk to me direct, whatever the case is, you can go straight to, the person at the top and be like, hey, what do you believe? What are we doing? So if you're interested in that, of course, we would need at least information as far as texting, but your email would suffice. If you'd like to get in contact with us, just look for our information in the depending on the platform you're using, it might be in the chat, or you can always go to our link tree, which is also in the chat. linktr linktr.ee/my name, KOFI_OFORI. Once again, you can go to linktr.ee/KOFI_OFORI for more information on how you can get in contact with us. How you doing, Brother Alton? Hello, Immortal Coil. How you doing? Peace, peace, peace. All right. Okay. And we agree with peace, Ashe, with all the power of the universe behind it, so to speak, right? Universal law, etc. So my name is on there, Kofi. Hashtag find Kofi, Kofi. So we're going to go ahead and get started. How you doing, Sister Beck? And we got that. So once again, pay attention to those announcements. Those who have children that do homeschooling stuff with us, we will be starting next week, at least with Kung Fu. So hopefully you guys will be able to join up with us and listen to those things going on. If you have children, how you doing, Elder Tamara? Tonight, or today, as we've taken our seats after our Bible pledge, today we're going to discuss the same series we've been doing. So we've been talking about changing or even reversing the curse means revealing the lie, right? Reversing the curses means revealing the lie. Okay, so for today, to get started, in reversing the curse reveals the lie, our focus for the whole time rather is going to be somebody by the name of Ibn Battuta. Now, please forgive me. There's somebody who's going to get, the spelling and get upset with me what the official spelling is. I'm just going to spell it the way that I see the most person spelling it. But once again, the person we're going to focus on today is Ibn, I-B-N, Battuta, B-A-T-T-U-T-E. Ibn Battuta. And there's going to be some correction because I've actually talked about this person improperly using the wrong name before, or I've talked about this person and not been able to recall his name, but at least I got his name, amongst other things. We've been studying the last couple of days, getting our stuff together. Thank you for the repost. How you doing, Cultural Prospect? So Ibn Battuta. You spell it like this: I-B-N, almost like IBM, but change that to an N for Nancy. I-B-N, Ibn, and then last name Battuta, or what we call last name, surname, Battuta, B-A-T-T-U-T-E. All right, I'm saying this because, of course, we want you to study this stuff, make sure I'm not lying, see if you can put two and two together when you speak on these things. We're going to speak from a historical context today, but our precepts are going to be righteous as usual. We're going to talk about Ibn, I-B-N, Battuta, B-A-T-T-U-T-E. And how you doing, General Yachasav? How you doing, big brother? You said originally from Somalia. You actually have relatives who live in Israel. You ran that end times Okay. All right. Welcome on. Um, so, Ibn Battuta, if you're not aware of who that is, he's a very famous historian. Basically, that helps us to see pretty much as far as the West is concerned. There are others that we listen to, right? Because the West is not the end all be all of who we are as a people. That being said, though, um, this is somebody that we use, as I've taught and said before, unfortunately, sometimes when it comes to us as a people, and even us who are grafted in, so to speak, right? And how you doing, Auntie Mary? Sometimes when it comes to us as a people, unfortunately, what happens is if we don't hear it from the Western perspective, then we're not going to hear it, right? When somebody says to me, oftentimes, when somebody says, "Give me a book to show that you blah blah blah," they don't want me to give an African source. They don't want me to do the jelly griot thing. If you don't know what a jelly is, jelly griot is in West Africa. We're supposed to be historians that basically are supposed to be like walking libraries. So I was bestowed that title amongst our own. You don't bestow that amongst yourself, right? Chain of command, but persons usually are going to say, hey, Kofi is a standard. Some of us do, right? And I appreciate it. And I'm not trying to be cocky, or I'm just being honest, right? Like, I've dedicated my life and will continue to for the rest of my life, to use every effort that I can, that I'm able to make sure that not only are we, coming into our belief system and stuff like that, but a big part of that is making sure that we know the real story, not just his story, not just someone else's story about us, not just, what we say we feel like because we haven't researched, or we just kind of given up with getting the truth. But some of us are really dedicated for the entirety of our lives, ensuring that we give out the story of our people and the story of others, truthfully as well, so that we can all, everybody upon earth, Adasase, even, might be able to learn the truth, right? So today, we're going to focus in on Ibn Battuta, Battute. If you have a platform that has um, that has a description for the video, you should be able to see the spelling right there. But once again, it's Ibn Battutte. Now, one of the reasons we bring up Ibn Battuta is because he is extremely valuable. He is necessary. He's also very recognizable, right, in the historical community, right? But he's also very recognizable. How you doing, Dominique? Shalom to you. Because he is basically the only person who gives us a full picture within one writing of all of Africa through the prism that he actually went to. Not just all of Africa, what we call Middle East, what we call Eastern Europe, India, going, even some would argue, and I'll give you the reasons why, but some would even argue, you know, that he did in fact go to Russia, Eastern Russia, and places like that, all over the place, been to China, and wrote everything. He was somebody who was trained by his parents at a very early age. His parents, I'm not sure if they were rich, but they definitely had money. They could afford to make sure he had a great education. And back then, they trained him to be a not just a Muslim scholar, but he was supposed to be a Muslim who was educated in law, right? And even though we are not Muslim, we still do believe in being lawful, right? So he is somebody that's very interesting to study because his prism, even though we'll see that he finds interesting ways to finesse certain things in his personal life, but his prism is supposed to be law according to Quran, right? According to the laws and principles that he believed that the Prophet Muhammad taught to be able to get, his people to where they were. And so he is Moroccan, an original Moroccan, right? But a Moroccan nonetheless. And he basically travels all around many different places in what he would have considered to be the world, or the modern world, or what he thought to be more than likely the civilized world. Um, but he's the only person to do this. And for 24 years, he was supposed to take a trip for 2 years, right? He had been trained, and he had been trained to be a Muslim guide as far as doctrine, as far as law. And so whatever city he went to, he would always have a job. And it served him very well, where he served kings, was sent by kings to all these different places, was married several times, and got divorces for just about every one, at least as far as the ones we know of, right? Was married at least 10 times, had multiple children, even though I think there's only 3 or 4 that I can recall specifically. And it's difficult to go through his stuff. We're not going to go through him in his entirety, but there's a book that basically the title is shortened to the travels, and it was he was at the end of his life, he was required, or not at the end of his life, at the end of his 24 years of travel, we know that a sultan came to him, the Moroccan sultan came to him, and said that you're going to for the next 2 years. He spoke everything that had happened from memory, so there can be some things that might be off here or there, but he spoke everything he could from memory, and somebody, a poet of the day, wrote it out for him. And so there's other books besides the travels, if you'd like to look them up, that are supposed to fill in the holes because he was going from memory. So him and the poet did the best they could to write something thorough out, and then after that, we're not sure if it was the poet or him, but somebody goes back and tries to fill in the holes. So just like, by the way, when you read the Quran, believe it or not, you're supposed to actually go back. There's other books that go with it because the Quran was not written by the Prophet Muhammad. So you have to actually go back and do some research and other things and see what persons are saying and see what the value system is in that. So same thing here with Ibn Battuta. How you doing, King B252? How you doing, Ever Bahina? All right, and thank y'all for the love. Appreciate you. How you doing, Mama G? All right, thanks y'all for the shares, for the reposts, and thank you, Mama G, for being part of the community and everybody on all the different platforms. So Ibn Battuta, once again, IBN space BATUTTE, or sorry, BATTUTE. Ibn Battuta, right? A few different ways his name is spelled. That's just the most common way I've seen it spelled. IBN, Ibn, space, Battuta, BATTUTE. Okay. All right. So with Ibn Battuta, why is it so important? What is the relevance of it? What is the lies that we've been told? Well, first things first, we get rid of a lie right off the bat with Ibn Battuta, as far as did we as a people, because he's Moroccan, right? An original Moroccan, right? Um, so Ibn Battuta speaks from our perspective. And so a lot of persons say that we didn't have anything written out. We didn't have any history. We didn't have anything that you can go log. But Ibn Battuta, in one book, 1,000 pages long, pretty much gets rid of that whole narrative and talks about going from city to city to city to city. Right? Talks about Cairo being his favorite city, actually. Morocco, eventually at the end of his writings, he says, but there's no place like home. He still puts Morocco first. We know that he went through Mali, where the original Ghana was, a little further north than where Ghana is today, if you know African and West African geography. He went through to China. There are persons that don't believe that he went to Eastern Russia, and so some persons will argue that he couldn't have gone to Eastern Russia, and more than likely he's just listening to what other persons have said about the Russians up there. For the sake of today, we're going to just say those things as if they did happen, um, because I don't really find any reason to doubt him other than persons go, well, he's a black man speaking. It's kind of like with Flavius Josephus. For those of you who've studied Flavius Josephus is somebody who you should study because he is somebody who was an Israelite. He was an Israelite taken prisoner. He was supposed to off himself, but decided not to and became a slave in the house of Vespasian. Vespasian, by the way, becoming emperor of Rome. Um, he's also the same person who was over the armies that took over Israel for the last time, when Israel was, the 70 AC and before, Israel. So he literally has the person, Flavius Josephus, wrote all these books and all these different things in history. And everybody believes him about a bunch of different things in history, except when it comes to, of course, his own people. Because how could an Israelite tell the history of an Israelite? Right? Pause and think about that. In their mind, how could an Israelite tell the truth about their own people? They must be making stuff up because they can't be as vast and they can't have as much history and they can't deny what we would say about them, even if they live something different, right? So Flavius Josephus actually talks about that a lot in his books, where he doesn't like the fact that persons will not give him credit for the history of his people, but will talk to him about everybody else, or but will believe about just about anything else. And this is something that's fascinating, but still happens today about our people, right? Where once again, if we don't give it to you from something where somebody in the West says, "Oh, okay, this is, we agree with this," and blah blah, then it can't be correct. Although the West has been teaching you guys lies, you know, from its inception, from its conception. How you doing, King Dexter? Thanks for being part of the community. So a lot of persons miss this stuff. When we have honest dialogue and they do not like us broaching subjects such as this, including, once again, our main theme for this whole series is reversing the curse means revisiting the lie. And so we have to revisit a lie, number one, where we have a historian, right, who has a belief system, who talks about the belief system of others, who goes to places to where they are tolerant. So even if there were so-called Muslim places and all the stuff that you're told that Muslims were terrible human beings and they would blah blah, and we're not going to act like there's no evil that ever exists, right? That being said, a lot of the Muslims, including Mansa Musa, richest man to ever live in ancient Ghana and, you know, Mali, and near Timbuktu and all that, he is somebody who's known actually by Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta can't stand uh, a few things Mansa Musa does, because not only do they have all this gold and they don't think that giving gold is actually a big deal because they have so much of it, um, they also don't force everybody to have to go by Muslim law, right? Not Sharia law, that doesn't exist yet. Before you say, whenever I say Muslim law, people go straight to Sharia and stuff like that. That's not exactly what we're talking about. How you doing, Prince? And how you doing, Brother Dwayne? How you doing, Sister Jennifer? JV, thanks for being part of the community. Thank y'all for the love. We appreciate you. Thanks for joining us. Once again, the name of the series we're in is called to reverse, reversing the curse means reversing the curse means revisiting the lie. Reversing the curse means revisiting the lie. And today we're talking about Ibn Battuta, Battute, right? How you doing, NRS? So this, if we get this together and we recognize what's going on, you'll recognize that very quickly. Our people obviously, even though we've been told different, had different places that we can go and look up what we did, right? And we should look for the right and the wrong, because if you study, once again, this the book that he wrote, which is basically, it's got a really really long title, but it's squashed down. The title squashed down to the travels. Once again, if you're looking for his book, Being Batute, look for the travels. It is a very expensive book. I believe there's a company coming up with a fourth edition, as far as last time I checked, and that would be like 5 years ago, if I'll be honest. The last time I checked, was able to check on it, I think there by now should have been a company that finished the fourth edition of it, and I think that the prices can range anywhere from $75 to $150. That being said, though, it's something that's your story. It is 1,000 pages, right? And also, too, if we be honest, the reason why it's so difficult is because it's not obviously in English language. So if you read and write, especially, but if you read Arabic, you'll be able to get, especially it's kind of ancient, but it's Arabic usually holds pretty true. So if you read Arabic, you'll be able to see what's going on there with it. Otherwise, like, you know, you're gonna have to depend on the translation, and certain things don't translate, or certain things can be mistranslated. And keep that in mind. There's really not an English book, to say the least. There's really not a European book. It's pretty much, if you're gonna look for it, you have to either go to somebody who's an expert in it, or you need to at least go to some Jeligriots, right? Or you need to go to some persons who hold history and know it enough to be able to teach it from their perspective. Listen to the other perspective as well, but the original perspective. So it's a difficult thing to go through, because you have to do some research just to be able to read it. Like I don't profess to read or write Arabic. I kind of know a couple symbols here or there. So I had to actually, in order to even fact check some stuff, I had to literally go through a whole bunch of stuff just to translate a couple words here or there, just so I could see, okay, is this correct or not? So, but if you would like to go for it, I've just given you the information. Once again, is title shortened down to the travels. Matter of fact, let me see what the exact title is. Ibn Battuta. I said Batute. It should be Battuta, I think. I think they pronounce it A. Anyway, Ibn Battuta was the title. Oh, now there's all these other extra names for it. Okay, well, it's shortened to the travel. I see like 15 different names for it. right? It goes back to stuff even written. There's a version written in 1355. There's a version written in 1877, right? So it goes back a ways. So if you can read some of the stuff, if you can get an English version of something or whatever language you're going to read it in, there are books that go back to 13. Uh, they go back to 1355. Yeah, 1355. So in 13, obviously, the closer you get to him writing it, the more you know. He's, um, so it's. I think he was born in 1304. So if you get something in 1355, that's pretty much right after he. That might be somebody literally copying what he wrote word for word, bar for bar. But anyways, so we're gonna. So I just want to put that in there that this is something difficult to do some research on. However, I believe it's something that's necessary and mandatory, right? And how you doing, bold servant? And thank y'all for the love. How you doing, Sister Deborah? If I didn't say so already, and to Sister Deborah, hopefully I made the distinction earlier. To both of you, welcome. So with Ibn Battuta, see it's person called with Ibn Battuta. I, I'll settle on that pronunciation for now, so I don't keep changing it the whole time. So for Ibn Battuta, um, one of the things that you'll discover. So once again, he's educated. He's sent by his family. That means his family would have had money, and he was getting ready to take a 2-year trip. He had been trained in law, right, especially concerning Muslim doctrine. So he was somebody where no matter where he went, he would be able to get payment for his services, right? He'd be able to get a job, so to speak, anywhere that he went, anywhere that he pleased, basically. So Ibn Battuta, or Battuta, excuse me, Ibn Battuta is already, you know, um, going to certain standards that we were taught, right? That these persons didn't have. If you recall, those of us who were taught about things from the perspective of chattel slavery and all that, we were taught that our people didn't read, they didn't write. How you doing, brother TJ? We were taught that they didn't have professions. We were taught that they just had no history. Even Batuta is one of the first persons that we have. We're literally, how you doing, Sister Carla? How you doing, Sister Taylor? He's one of the first persons that we have. Not actually, that's not even correct. Obviously, we know we go way further back than him, but he's one of the best teachings you can have, especially from the 1300s, right? Once again, I believe, he was born 1304, right? And goes and he actually spends time with Mansa Musa, right? Probably not even Bakar at this point, because he's gone on his um, he's gone, looking for land in the east, right? Which later we'll find out is more than likely was in East South America that they went to and made a whole city over there. But he cleans up a lot of different things as far as what we're told, especially from a time frame that many of us might not be aware of, where so-called black persons, right, Moors. He's from Morocco, so Moorish actually makes a lot of sense with him as apropos. He's he's sent with a bunch of money for a 2-year trip. He's planned for it possibly to go 3 years. His main objective is to do the Hajj, right? Which is, to make sure that he goes to Mecca and basically does everything that Muhammad does, which is important in every Muslim's life to go, if not physically to go in your mind, of course, but a goal of all is to try and make it to Mecca, right? And so he's headed there. And so he's got 2 years saved up, maybe 3 years saved up. He ends up, though, once again, traveling for 24 years before he finally comes back to Morocco, right? And goes to quite a few different places through the East, the West, Europe, Asia, Africa, right? All these different places in between. And even deals with a lot of stuff historically that happened, including plague that made its way from Europe into Asia and Africa, all these different things. So he speaks on a lot of different things that happened. And so when we hear a person saying we have no recollection or we have no clue, or it was dark ages meaning that everybody was stupid or all information was lost, it's like, no, actually, from, we have a perspective of one person who literally was traveling from place to place to place to place. We have many perspectives, but even Batuta is extremely important and valuable. And us being able to say, no, you can't lock us into, nobody knows what happened with you all. Nobody ever wrote anything down. We have no clue as to what you're saying. Right? We that's right. The old world, the ancient world, right? Very advanced, and somewhat has been abandoned because why would you go there if you've taught everybody that anybody of color has has nothing to offer? Remember, that's why one of the things that we did in this live series was we had to talk about color change. If you have started to enslave, and by the way, 1304, we're not quite at the places where we can verify, but you're not that far away from Portugal in the 1300s beginning slave trade in Portugal, Spain, beginning in Spain, the Spanish Inquisition starting to happen. All this stuff is about to start happening pretty much around this time frame, right? You keep on doing the math and going forward, right? You're going to have the last Moorish king lose eventually. Matter of fact, he sees one of the battles that happens between the Moors um, and um, and I think it's in Spain. In Spain, he sees it and actually volunteers. He tries to run in and fight on one of those fights and ends up getting there too late. So you actually, he's actually there. We see a bunch of stuff happening. We know that these Moors were even identified as looking the same way that Christ did in Revelation chapter 2. That said that they had skin that looked like it was thrown, burnt in a furnace. They had hair that was like wool. They had eyes that were like fire, same way that Christ is described. So there's a lot of different things that we catch from this time period, and it's just kind of looked over because for a lot of persons, all they're told is either they were enslaved or even over there. As much as we don't like to bring this into the thought process, there were persons that were also enslaving others. Now, not to chattel slavery levels, right? But they weren't. It wasn't. Some of that stuff over there definitely was not just indentured servitude. It was slavery. Now you could buy your way out, so it was a better way, so to speak. You weren't a slave for the rest of your life. It wasn't based off of color, but if you were a part of a people and you didn't do anything except be on the wrong side of a battle, you easily could be sold into slavery, right? Flavius Josephus, who I talked about earlier, he was an Israelite general, ends up becoming a slave, and lives the rest of his life out. As far as I recall, I believe he lives the rest of his life out as a slave, but is in such high, but being a slave to the emperor, maybe not such a bad gig, right? So he might continue in that. I'm not saying that we should be like slavery wasn't so bad. I'm just saying, slavery is even in that there is truth to you have to look at different forms of it, right? But this is not chattel slavery yet. Nevertheless, slavery is horrible, and Ibn Battuta is somebody who's very big on slavery. You can say, well, it's the times, it's this, it's that, whatever you want to go with. I'm just telling you, like, there's going to be some things that we have to be honest about. So, including not just being honest about, well, we knew a bunch of stuff, but also, okay, well, what were persons doing in Cairo, right? Was the Khan, right? That was in India. What was he doing to persons? He was considered to be out of his mind. He's somebody that would be so-called dark-skinned or POC or so-called black, right? What were persons in Kemet doing? Um, and what were they doing as far as taking others' culture appropriation and stuff? These are persons that we don't want to talk about, but there was in fact some of that's going on. How you doing, Shima? And how you doing, Elder and Ice? You said the more spoken of history are Ottoman, Abyssinian, the Ishmaelite, their sons of Korah. Well, there's definitely some of that going on. Just like there's a lot of persons who are Moorish who are thought about only as being Muslim and stuff, and forget that they kept their culture too, or that there's so-called Christians that were over there, or there were so-called Buddhists, that were the so-called, and those are the ones that Europe gives the most play to. There were Yoruba it would have made their way up there. There were, if you were Kemetic, if not just Egyptian but Kemetic, there were persons that probably kept up with Kemetic lore or Kemetic standards and belief systems and 42 confessions of Ma'at. If you were a Ethiopian, you probably kept a lot of stuff that was more kept with the original word, while at the same time you were also being at that time heavily influenced by not Western Europe's Christianity, but you were being heavily influenced by Eastern Europe's Christianity. In other words, two Romes, Western Rome, Eastern Rome. Eastern Rome becomes the Ottoman Empire. Western Rome becomes, you know, Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, right? And even on the Eastern side too, you have to realize that a lot of persons started mixing. When we say mixing iron and clay, it gets deep. Because if we're, a lot of us generally only talking about one side of the world, if we start going into the East, right, then you have to also recognize not only was it Christianity mixed with a bunch of stuff, right, or Christianity was the pagan stuff and a lot of different rituals and things that were heathenistic being mixed together with so-called, Jesus Christ. But then also too, you have Muslims that eventually come into that, and Christianity takes that and starts doing some weird stuff. And some Muslims, not all, right, but some start, just like not all Christian, but some, right, start doing that thing too. Matter of fact, Christianity is straight up mixing of iron and clay. That's what it is. So, you have a lot of different factors playing, right? But as far as the truth, right? Once again, if we want to reverse the curse, we have to revisit the lie. One of the things that has come into our mind is that we have a limited history, or how do we find it? Where do we find it? And some of this stuff is more on the nose and in front of your face than you might think, right? So, if you look at it right in front of your face, once again, the Travels by Ibn Battuta is literally 1,000. At least the original was 1,000 pages long, and you have a person who took a bunch of trips, really, because once again, he's only supposed to take 2-3 year trip and then come back and stop at some places along the way. Instead, he ends up being gone for 24 years. So basically grew up, became a man, right, out there. I believe he was 40, I don't recall, he was 40 something. I feel like it's 42, but I could be off on that. But he was 40 something years old when he got back. So he starts, if you do the math, let's say he was 45. 45, you do 25, he was 20 years when he left. If he was 50 and you do 25, he was 25 when he left. He was a very young man, and he gets shaped by his experiences. And when he left, you'll see he's very much so into the law, so much so that when Ibn Battuta goes from place to place, you'll discover that he actually is kind of a tattletale, right? If anybody gets any little thing wrong, he doesn't just go, oh man. Like, for example, there was a place he got to, and the brothers were indoors at a place to bathe. And so the law required that you would, I forget what they're called, but you would basically have something to cover yourself down there. And the men were basically like, it was kind of extra or whatever, and so some of the men weren't covering themselves. Nobody thought it was a huge deal, but Battuta sees it, says it's not part of doctrine, and he goes not to the men, he goes to the persons that are above them. He does this quite a bit. He does this quite a bit. There's a woman who tries to get away from her husband. He asks if he can travel with her, then he finds out she's leaving and not going where she's supposed to go. He goes back and tells on her. He makes his way up quite a bit because he's trustworthy. And some of us, look, he's trustworthy. Then some of you might not like it if you were to read it. He does come across as a tattletale, but he's, he's one that's very big and, on this is what it states, this is the law, but boom, this is what it is. And anybody that says anything different, you're going to get it, kind of thing. How you doing, Brother Jermaine? How you doing, Luby? It's, I don't know if it matters, but it's in American. So in all the different things that you'll see with Ibn Battuta, he's very interesting, right? He's very interesting. His thought process is interesting, and it's different from ours because once again, our thought process is one of looking down upon that, or some persons who still consider themselves to be Americans and stuff. You probably look down upon, the East in general, because you're always told that everybody down there is, everybody over there has got to be, part of these ritualistic things that are done to women that are flown over to places, or everybody over there is part of, I'm having a brain fart, sorry. Everybody over there is ISIS, or everybody over there is, what was, I'm forgetting what, I was in the military at the time. Not Obama, Osama bin Laden, part of, I'm sorry, I'm having a moment here. But even though that was a made up word, and so was ISIS, by the way, ISIS was made up. They weren't original names for the persons. How you doing, Sister D? Forgive me. But yeah, so we have a very bad way of looking at that thought process and not even thinking to ourselves, Israel would have lived somewhat like these persons, right? And thinking to ourselves that if you're West African or Central African or even Eastern African or North African especially, you were probably living very similar to these people. We don't see that even a lot of these people were traveling the world, including even coming over this way, right? way before anybody else was coming over this way. We forget how much influence, being, um, um, you know, belief system from that side of the world goes. Like I said, literally stretching into Eastern Europe, which you'll see still today if you go to Eastern Russia. Eastern Russia um, lives a lot like Africa, a lot like parts of China, a lot like parts of Mongolia, a lot like, a lot like us, you know. And so we're not aware of these things, but being Battuta, he opens up a doorway for us. So that's my prayer. Prayerfully, if all goes well today, we'll be able to see those different things more highlighted, and we'll be able to see for ourselves rather than through somebody else's prism what it is that we had. So Ibn Battuta traveled a bunch of different places. I would do my best to get as much. And once again, the book is 1,000 pages, and I'm not going to act like I know what all 1,000 pages say. But I've studied probably more than most of it. I've actually sat down with a copy of it in the library and gone through as much, as well as, you know, gone through different things virtually as well. So I will do my best to represent um, not just really the teachings, but the historical documentation. It's really one man's journey, and he gives a lot in it. So as far as Mansa Musa, I'll start with him because usually that's a name that many are familiar with. If you're not Mansa Musa, his name actually translates to Moses. He was a sultan, a Muslim sultan of over ancient Mali, which is where ancient Ghana used to be, which is close to where Timbuktu and places like that are. Ghana today is not the original Ghana. Ghana today was named after that Ghana when Kwame Nkrumah and others came together and had a vote in which they said that they would like Ghana to be what they were referred to as, having us as a people think about where we came from and when we were at our greatest. When we were at our greatest, one of the ways of looking at us at our greatest, at least, is Mansa Musa and how much he had. Now, a lot of persons don't know much about Mansa Musa because basically all we're really told about him is, if we're told anything, we're told he was the richest man to ever live. But that's kind of where the discussion ends, right? But Ibn Battuta gives us at least a little bit more. So, as I said, Ibn Battuta grew up with a lot. He was sent on assignment by a lot of different sultans all over the place. And his mindset was, especially, and by the way, it was traditional. Usually, when you went to a Muslim city, because of the weights that his position held, as far as being somebody who upheld doctrine, wherever he went, he was actually very much sought after and would actually get a lot of money because there was always a need for somebody to help persons out with how to look at law and doctrine, right? So everywhere he went, he always would receive a bunch of gold, right? And he would receive a high place. He sometimes would even receive one of the best houses that they would have in the area, and and he would receive all these things. And when he received them as he received them as as basically like somebody who was deserving of it, and so he would always be happy. He would be grateful. He'd be thankful, and so he thought that's everywhere he went. He had a belief system that he was supposed to be treated this way. Interestingly enough, though, he gets to ancient Mali, right? Ancient Ghana, and when he gets to Mali, he is given a gift. But the gift, if I'm not mistaken, I could be off on this. I believe it's like an equivalent to oatmeal and honey. And so he laughs at the gift. Matter of fact, a similar gift is given to him after that by the Sultan. And he actually kind of laughs at the Sultan. He's brash, he's brave, but he's also a representative. He represents someone else. He was sent on behalf of the Moroccan Sultan. At this point, remember, it's at the end of his 24 years, so he was sent by the Muslim Sultan after he got back to Morocco. The Muslim Sultan sends him back again down to Ghana to be like an ambassador down there for him. So he was a little brash, little, did a little too much. You don't go in front of a sultan and laugh off his gift. But it shows us something about Mali that we don't think about. The mentality of the persons of Mali was not and is not, because they still exist today, right? But it is their mentality is not because we have gold we are rich. Matter of fact, not only just figuratively speaking, but literally speaking, they had so much gold, they had so much riches, they had so much stuff that was desired that if you lived there, you already had it, right? This is the same Mansa Musa who is known for going around to different places on his pilgrimage, on his trying to get, to Mecca, and put so much gold in certain places that literally gold was so out of whack, out of sorts. If you flood the market, like when they print money over and over again, like after a while, the money, what does it matter? That's why you have inflation, right? One of the reasons you have inflation is that the money keeps getting printed. Now, one of the reasons you have inflation too is because persons are greedy, right? But one of the reasons you have inflation is because they keep printing money. Right, that's one of the reasons they actually burn money too. If they burn, believe it or not, they actually do burn money. The United States is supposed to be the only persons who can burn their own money, supposedly. But they burn money to try and keep the value of it down. Because if you just keep printing and printing and printing and printing, you get to these countries that you've heard about. Like I believe this is one of the countries. Please forgive me if I'm saying one of the wrong ones. I believe one of them is like Zimbabwe or something like that, where you get to a place where you've printed so much money that now people are like, if you had $800 million, persons would be like, that's not enough for you to buy certain things, right? So you like it's not that much because you just printed it. It was a quick fix. You print, or you've I don't know if you've seen certain movies, but certain movies they even show this. They show it briefly, but they'll show persons are making like counterfeit money or whatever. They're just basically making extra stuff and then trying to flood the market with it. As soon as you do it, it causes you a lot of headache, right? So whenever Mansa Musa would go somewhere and he would put so much gold in persons' hands, basically like what is gold at that point? If everybody has gold to the point to where he's gone, like almost to everybody he sees, he'll walk into if he goes into a library, okay, yep, cool. I don't even care how much, I'm getting one book, but hey, whatever, give him a handful of gold, right? You're going to the gym to work out. Oh, okay, cool. I have my workout. Well, the fee for working out here is $30. Okay, give him a gold brick, right? Like if you give everybody gold, and then everybody starts trying to go everywhere to try and sell the gold, you can't. You see what I'm saying? You can't have it work that way. So in Mali, it's actually interesting his reaction, because his reaction is thinking, well, they are going to think about gold and they're going to give me the reward everybody else. As a matter of fact, he's thinking to himself, I don't want food or honey or just you to be nice. I want you to make sure that you give me a bunch of gold. And in Mali, they were like, I mean, I guess, but gold's kind of pointless here, right? So we actually see pointed here to where for our people, and this is something that goes even deeper, because if you go a little further down, now you're getting closer to modern Ghana, right, and Nigeria area, and places such as that. When you look at these places, right, and you see stuff like the Gold Coast, right, the Gold Coast was a place where there was so much gold all over the place that if you came down there, right, this is one of the reasons why a lot of Europeans actually came over there, and that's where you have all the different castles like Amina Castle and others that pop up, because they were actually over there on in West Africa, and they literally it was described as you would be walking and you could easily trip over gold. So a bunch of persons came over there first for that, and then went for all the other things, and came for the Negroes as well, right? So that shows you that Negroes were just as valuable as gold, and this is not only the Negroes we need, but the gold. Remember, because Negroes doesn't mean black. It's become that over time because we don't care about nationality, we don't care about study, we don't care about seeing and going in even deeper. He said traveling in boats before the boat, everyone is free to talk about, right? So, even Battuta shows us right there that already in the huge chunks of West Africa, they're not that concerned about gold. Right now, they knew enough to protect it to the point to where even Battuta even says he never saw the gold reserves. He never saw the actual mines. They kept that away from everybody back then because they recognized that persons would come looking for the mines. So the only place you can get the gold was you had to come to them. So you had to come to them, then they would bring a bunch of gold to where you were, and then you could talk business. But they never actually allowed anybody to go to the gold reserves. Now, this is something that we can learn from today, by the way, as a people, because we're very big on making sure that everybody knows all the stuff and can be brought into this stuff, and everybody can have their hands on it. But there's some things that are reserves for us, right? What's there's some things that should be reserved for your family. How you doing, Sister Greta? There's some things that should be reserved for your nation. Even if you want to talk about holy days, right? Certain parts of holy days, certain offerings, certain things that are done supposed to be reserved for you, right? This is something that we actually learned that they did through Ibn Battuta. He says, yeah, I never got a chance to see it, and that was purposefully done. They did not want anybody to come through and see what it was and have access to what it was that made them great. Now, obviously, we want a person to have access to the Most High. We want, but what I'm saying is that if somebody's not seeing, we don't like to think how nations think. If somebody's coming into your nation and wants something that is extremely valuable to your nation, and all of a sudden wants you to take them directly to it, you don't do that, right? You'll never know how many nuclear weapons the United States of America has or doesn't have. Right? The whole thing about the argument that Trump would try to put out there as a distraction for y'all just a little while ago, talking about we're going to test the nukes because Russians and in North Korea and India and whoever else they said is testing the missiles, even if they're not testing the actual nuclear tech or not actually exploding nukes. But that's all. You'll never know. I'm here to tell you, you will never know unless you work for the United States of America and are able to have that a certain type of classification. You will never know, and even they really don't know all. But you'll never know all the places where nuclear weapons are. This is not because you're you're a bad person. This is because not everybody needs to know where the United States of America has their stuff, right? One of the things that's off in France now, that France is starting to lose a lot of stuff and going in the third world real quick. After we're telling all these persons all these different things, France is going into the toilet. Why? Well, one of the reasons it is because all the countries, especially the African ones, are saying we're done giving you stuff, right? And therefore, when you don't have access to it anymore, you can have access to your own stuff. And the persons that colonized you and enslaved you and stuff, they can go ahead and deal with the stuff that you've been dealing with because they've been taking your stuff. How you doing, Sister Raquel? By the way, real quick, mic check, 1 2, testing 1 2. Can you guys hear and see me all right? Yes, no, maybe so. Yes, no, maybe so. You can hear me all right? Yes, okay. How you doing, Sister Omika? Feel like I might be saying hello to the same persons over and over again, but all right. Can you guys hear? You guys can hear me? Okay, cool, cool, cool. Right. So, and how you doing, Sister Sherry? Right. So perfect. All right, cool. So in all these different things we're saying, we have to, or in is being taught to us. A lot of us are not recognizing and realizing, and we should, that there's a lot of stuff that we can learn from. One of the things that is taught is that this whole thing of what others do to us is what we would do to others is not necessarily so. What you mean? Um, persons will be like, don't let so-called black persons get any power because you know, they're this, they're evil, they're blah blah. Or some persons have it in their mind that we're going to do the same thing to them that they did to us. When that's not our standard, right? Our standard is do unto others as you want done unto you, and we know the whole proverb as for this is the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets guides where we're headed, right? The Most High will fight our battles, and the Most High will ultimately get what we call the victory, right? How you doing, Minister Raj? And how you doing, one with you, I think, right? But we have to recognize that there's a lot of persons. So what happens is that persons go, oh, you're gonna do, but we don't have a history. I'm not gonna say once again. I'm being in general, right? There obviously can be outliers. However, we as a people don't really have a history of giving the same curse to somebody else. Matter of fact, if you believe in the Bible, right, the curse that we have can't be given. It's something that you earn, and it's something that you earn, um, if you will, because right, because you have done something wrong, basically disobedience. So if anybody earns a curse or gets cursed or has to deal with things because they came against Israel, well, that's due to your own stuff, right? We're not going out there looking to see who are we going to get next or who are we going to get. And any Israelite who speaks like that doesn't speak according to the scroll, right? If their only thing is, well, the Most High, when He offed somebody in back in the day, He offed men and women and children. But there was sometimes He did that. He didn't do that every single time. Number one, right? That wasn't the commandment every time. But even with that, have you ever looked at the context of why that was done? right? Have you ever looked up the context? Have you looked up the disobedience? Have you ever looked up what these persons were doing? Right before Sodom and Gomorrah deals with what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. Have you not noticed the proximity? Matter of fact, a lot of persons don't. We went over this in our Bada Shot series. Sodom and Sodom is already considered to be evil when Lot decides that he wants to be next to them, right? So when he decides to go next to them, they've already been doing evil. They've already been doing a lot of stuff. And matter of fact, he was trying so hard to play both sides of the fence that he would hang out with them. Then when he saw the angels came, he tried to move out. He tried to act like he wasn't with them, and he tried to protect the angels. But the angels are like, we came to destroy them. you know. So there's a lot of different reasons as to, and sometimes the reason might not be one that we like, right? But the Most High didn't do that with every single group. But even when he did, it was due to disobedience. It was due to basically being extremely heathen to the point of like of really, I mean, let's just go to it. It's basically disobedience, no matter which way you want to slice it. Can I say it like that? I'm trying to be nice about it, but I shouldn't be nice about disobedience. If one is disobedient, then you get consequences for your disobedience, right? What happened with the flood is consequences to disobedience. Matter of fact, if you look at it properly and fairly, even the whole earth had been under um, who we call Enoch. Anache, the whole all Aratz was under Enoch, right? Enoch was the king of the earth. And then after he passed away, they've come to find out people loved Enoch, but not the Most High. And so literally we go from Enoch to his great grandson Noah is the flood, right? And Noah is 600 years old before the flood happens, right? Right when the flood happens, that's when he turns 600, basically during the flood. So, or right before the flood. So if you're looking at all this stuff, man had all this opportunity to do all these different things and decides to be disobedient. But Noah didn't have to fight the battle. The Most High did. Right? Now I'm saying all that to just give a reminder because in all these things, there's going to be somebody who once again presses this and tries to say, we need to take over and we got to take over the city and we got to do this and we got to do that. And it's like, no, no, no. Like, let's let the word be true. How you doing, One with you? Thanks for being part of the community. Let what Yah says be true. Let the word be true. We're not in a situation where we are the ones who are going to give all the retribution. The Most High will, as He always has. And if He directs somebody to do something, which you better be in tune with Holy Spirit if you're going to start doing that. But if He directs us to do something, then we be ready. Right? Outside of that, our responsibility, even in that, is to separate. Right? To make sure that we protect ourselves when we separate. I believe that for sure. But we separate. All right, Joseph Jones. Thank you. Appreciate that. Right? So So, so, so our goal is to separate. See, Yah regretted exactly making man, and in regretting making man, what happens is what he says. Okay, I regret making man. They are completely disobedient. They're not even my creation. He says, I do not recognize them. Doesn't mean that they're not walking on two legs still, right? Doesn't mean they're not no longer bipedal. It doesn't mean that they don't have strength. It doesn't mean that they can't speak. It doesn't mean that they cannot pray. It's that they will not, and that they become so evil. Remember, evil. He can't look upon evil. He can't look upon sin. When you are a sinner, and definitely a sinner by choice, over and over and over again, he doesn't even recognize you as man. And the earth was created for man, but he doesn't even see his creation walking around. He's ready to go ahead and say, okay, well then, if that's the case, I should go ahead and get rid of this because it's not righteous until it says that his grace, right, his khan was upon Naah or upon Noah, right, and Noah um, basically had relationship with him and trained his children in it. And so even though he only had eight, his wife, Noah's wife, Noah's children, Noah's daughter-in-laws, but he took eight and he remade the whole earth. As far as the population of man, he technically remade the earth because we know after the earth went through the flood, it split as well. Right? How you doing, Roger? Thanks for being part of the community. How you doing, Sister Shirley? How you doing, Henrietta? So, and all these different things that are going on, we have to recognize there's going to be a lot of persons who are talking about, well, yeah, we need to take on blah blah. Let Yah fight our battles. Right? Our responsibility is to separate. Right? When when the plagues happened in Kemet, Israel remained faithful, even though at first we almost broke off and we were ready to go at Noah, but we decided to be faithful. And once you decide to be faithful, hear this, beloved. Once you decide to be faithful with it, then whenever it was time for us to be in Goshen, we're in Goshen. And what started happening, you started seeing plagues go on one side only. The children of Israel were protected. If you went over to Goshen, your cattle were all right. If you went over to Kemet, your cattle were not. Right? If you went over to Israel, you saw light throughout the day. If you went over to Kemet, I'm sorry, you went over to Goshen, right, which is where Israel was. If you went over to Goshen, not so much. If you went over to Goshen, you could go ahead and look up at the sky. If you went over to Kemet, you might have to dodge hail and fire that was burning everything up attached to the hill. Right? So we let Yahweh fight our battles. All right, we have another Sister Deborah. How you doing? Thanks for being part of the community. So we have Sister Deborah, and Sister Deborah on right now. Praise Yah. Amen. All right. So, but you see all those different things. How you doing, Danielle? Everybody coming in, we appreciate you on all the different platforms where you're joining us live or watching later on. Thank you so much. Right, and so in these things we're seeing very clearly, right? We're seeing very clearly that that the Most High will fight our battle. So when we see this stuff, I want you to, we're not going to do this thing where, okay, all weapons go ablaze and this and that or whatever. But I say all that to say that persons, once again, getting back to where we were, thank you, Holy Spirit, for getting me back to where we're supposed to be. A lot of persons will say, and how you doing, Mama Tay? A lot of persons will say stuff like, oh yeah, well, if they get, if so-called POC, person of color, black person, whatever, if they get power, right, they're going to do X, Y, Z. But when we look at what even Battuta says, especially about a place as advanced and as intelligent and as great and as smart, right, and with sail ships that can go all the way over to the east of South America and all this stuff that we're seeing, even Battuta also says that I noticed, and he didn't like it. He didn't like it at all, right? But he was like, I also noticed that women would talk to men, right? Like women could talk to men. He didn't like that. He saw somebody in court that was Molly, and he saw his wife out talking to another man. He comes up to the husband. He comes up to the man and goes, "Hey, they're out there talking to each other." And the man says, "Yeah, we're okay with women having male friends here." He's astonished, right? He was astonished by that. Like, oh wow, y'all would allow that, right? Or there's even there's a time where you see the tolerance where even some of Mansa Musa's daughters are still not they're still not Muslim. They still walk around not just being the opposite of modest. They actually don't, they're from a culture to where, depending on, I guess, what their mother or mothers would have said, I'm not sure about how that operates in this particular context, but, they walked around without anything on their top. They were topless. And, even Battuta has a problem with that, goes to the Sultan. Your daughters are walking around, without any tops on. He's like, yeah, over here we're tolerant of different belief systems. Right? And by the way, there's a lot more of that needs to be discussed in Israel. In Israel, we have certain things that must be done no matter what. That being said, also too, I think a lot of persons miss, including our so-called Old Testament. Old Testament, New Testament is really not a thing in the Bible. Somebody made that up. That being said, though, to our Old Testament believers, and even for our New Testament believers, you should probably know this, that I'm not saying we have persons walking around Israel topless or anything, but you have laws on the books for strangers. And I need you to recognize this. It's not just for strangers who will be grafted in, even though many of them will become grafted in, but it's also for strangers. There's laws in the books on how you treat them as they come through, or as you might do business with them, right? So going back to when we're doing our Holy Day series, if you go to Leviticus 23, you'll discover that it starts telling you like during Passover, that strangers, right, especially strangers at this point, really being not only are they not Israel, but they definitely don't believe what we believe. It says they shouldn't participate in Passover. If not, according to First Corinthians, they would eat or drink damnation unto themselves, right? So we shouldn't put somebody in a position to where they should be during Passover if they themselves don't believe. That being said, right, or also has another law. That being said, there's another law in the books that says during, I believe, it's the feast of or or Pentecost, I believe, where it starts saying that there's certain things that are going to certain sacrifices that are to be given, and some of the sacrifice can be set aside for the priest. And so the priests are told this is not for this sacrifice to set aside is not even for is not for the strangers. So if you see a stranger in the street and they need food or whatever, you can give them food, but it can't be the sacrifice. There are certain things that happen, right? Like we said, that you protect yourself. That being said, though, there are laws in the books to where, like, if strangers are coming through and they need money or whatever, hey, some of the offering and tithe is even for them. Make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure you take care of Levites, widows, orphans, strangers. I mean, some orphans and even the poor. But then also too, don't forget about the stranger. Don't forget about the stranger that might be coming through. So there's laws in the books, as much as we don't like to hear this, to where we should treat persons as human beings first, right? First, second, third, fourth, fifth, right? And even if in the kingdom they're considered to be the least, but what you do to the least of these, my brethren, you also do unto me. Now somebody will get caught up on the my brethren part. I get it. I'm just saying, right? We should recognize and realize and even compartmentalize that, right? That there are laws even for us as Israel, for us to make sure that we are thinking about others properly. And so even Battuta, right, is coming through and he's like, well, they're not doing what Muslims do and blah blah whatever. And Mansa Musa says, okay, I get that, but over here, we don't we don't allow that to stop us. Or even there were other persons like even Battuta got upset. And I'm not saying what you should or shouldn't do. If you believe it's the law, follow it. You know, the Bible even says just make sure that you condemn persons the way you want to be condemned, you forgive them the way you want to be forgiven, and you judge them the way you want to be judged. So if you live by that standard, then hold the standard, and just realize if you end up with something in your hand, you should be caught too. But he even had a problem, even Battuta even had a problem with some of the persons who were there who swore that they, and he had this in many different places he went, granted, but swore that they were Muslim, but would find different loopholes to be able to go ahead and still drink things that got them drunk because it could not be considered to be alcohol. And Mali, though, some of them were just straight up drinking alcohol. And he thought to himself, well, you can't be as pious, you can't be holy if you're drinking alcohol. And once again, they would have to let him know, over here, we're just letting you know, no, there's more tolerance. Doesn't mean, by the way, tolerance should not be an excuse for us to let persons do whatever they want. There are laws in position for a reason. But that being said, though, yeah, there is a so-called, or there's a place of mercy that we should have. And is it Jesus is Lord? Okay, well, thank you for being on with us. Thank you for being part of the community, right? So, that there are certain things that we should uphold, but we should also recognize the importance of humanity, right? The importance of like acceptance, and even Battuta got better at this, right, in his life than what he was when he left Morocco initially. So he did get much better at that. But yeah, giving person mercy, or even saying that we might not see this the same. Even Battuta had when he was in India, he had a sultan, yes, a sultan, and by the way, we're talking about he's Moroccan, but also the sultan that he went to in India. Persons forget they were Mongolian, right? Persons forget that Khan, the first Khan, Genghis Khan, well, not the first Khan, but I guess the Khan of Khans, right? Genghis Khan, he actually had obviously many different children and stuff, but also had a vast empire that they put together very quickly. In doing so, you'll see that he basically has his children and grandchildren, great grandchildren, etc. They become the Khans all over the place, all over the world. A lot of us don't think about that, but if it's not a lot of us, including us today, we're heavily influenced by Mongolian culture. We just don't think of it as being Mongolian culture. because it's wrapped up in other things that we'd rather give credit to. It's kind of like, you know, how we look at Alexander the Great because he's closer to Europe, to what we consider to be true European. You know, they consider Alexander the Great to be great, even though he did a whole bunch of craziness, but they don't mind it. They say he did it in the name of Greece, and he did it to be powerful. And it's because he had this powerful drive, and he was a great man, and da. But then, you know, they talk about Genghis Khan, and oh yeah, you know, he was horrible, and he did this and blah blah. I was like, well, what do you think Alexander the Great was doing, right? But anyways, so Genghis Khan has this empire, and it starts having khans all over. And so, like I said, you know, you have a lot of stuff that comes out of that. You have a lot of stuff that's actually that you go by. One of the things that you go by, believe it or not, that is something that can be great, but at the same time, depending how it's used, not so great, is the inclusion of of all the different religious belief systems. That was not something that was really big anywhere. In Africa, we see it more. But if we be honest, there were other places to where they weren't so nice to you if you weren't Muslim, or if you weren't Christian, or if you weren't whatever, right? So there were other places, still are some places like that. But Mongolians are one of the first persons to be like, hey, everybody can worship whatever they want, because Genghis Khan, and then even his grandson behind him, the one that was depicted, even though it's not a great depiction, but the one that was depicted, if you've ever seen that Netflix series that came out, it was only like 2 seasons. I think it's called Marco Polo, right? You'll discover that basically, like, the Khans were very big on loyalty, right? Like, if you come in here and you don't rock the boat, and we can consider you to be loyal, and if we need you, you'll show up for us. Then they basically were one of the first persons to be like, hey, pretty much do whatever you want. And somebody would say, well, what about Rome? Rome mixes iron and clay to a certain degree, right? Jesus in Rome, right? Half man, half Zeus. Yesu. Jesus is used to basically sprinkle on top of whatever you did, right? The pagan can say, you know what? I am doing Lupercalia, but hey, I am having as much sex as possible. It's the months of the wolf and everything. But hey, put a ash cross on my head, right? And now it's okay that I did all those things, because I'm gonna go ahead and not do it for 40 days. And when I don't do it for 40 days, then I can celebrate Ishtar, the moon spirit, and go right back into what I was doing, right? That's a different type of thing. You can say, yeah, there's obviously the mixing of iron and clay, but they're doing something different with it. Like over here, he's saying, hey, I don't even care if you care about the father of the sky, like the Mongolians do and all that. He's like, I don't care about all that, right? I care if when it's time that I call you, that you come and fight. You can fight for me, and you can say Allah, you can say Alachem, you can say Yahweh, you can say Christ, you can say Buddha, you can say Krishna, you can say whomever. Just fight on my behalf. That's what the Mongolian way is. So the Mongolians are actually the first persons who allow for that to happen, which is when you get a bunch of the crossbreeding of belief systems and stuff like that. But also, too, you get something that happens to where now there is no separation, which means basically when we come back to it, everybody comes right back into classism, racism, sexism, et cetera, right? We go back into the breaking down of the family rather than the building up. And how you doing, Sister Tia? Right? So we go back into the breaking down of the family and not the building up, right? So a lot of us don't realize, like, Mongolian, matter of fact, besides how many children and persons are of the bloodline and have direct heritage back to Genghis Khan, even besides that, you will discover that basically in India, the last place that there was a Greek throne, the last place that Alexander the Great's dynasty was in the world, was in India. And even if you go to the Taj Mahal, the Mongolian, there was a Mongolian, right, who was over the nation that built the Taj Mahal. He built it for his wife. He was a Mongolian, going back to Khan. So a lot of us are not aware of, like, the reach that Mongolia even has, right? Nowadays, when you see Mongolia, the only thing you'll see is kind of like their version of when we used to wake up in the middle of the night and you see the African child with the fly on his eye and the big stomach. That's kind of all you see in Mongolia is like places where there's huts. And there's nothing forgetting that Mongolia has big cities and things as well. There's many persons that still live like that, but there's many persons that still live like Native Americans in America, in the Americas. How you doing, Brother Dennis? That doesn't mean that everybody lives like that. There's still a bunch of persons that live the way that the Bush used to live in the middle of Africa. Doesn't mean that every city you're going to come, or every person you come into contact with, that's their thought process. Doesn't mean that everybody in Africa knows how to hunt. It's almost the same mindset that everybody in China, right? It's kind of the same mindset. Everybody in China must know kung fu. Kung fu just means well done, right? So you can have some kung fu pork chops. Just means they well done. You know, you you can have a kung fu marriage. Just means it's well done, right? But the mindset, the ignorance of it is that whatever somebody got out of it or whatever they portrayed, that's all there is to it. And even what happens if we're not careful, it changes the mindset of even the nation. Like our nation, Israel, has a lot of issues that come up because we still try to be like the nation who, whatever we could give. So there's still a lot of shucking and jiving. There's still a lot of step and fetch it activity. There's still a lot of Bojangles activity. There's still a lot, right, of Mama Thornton, who's one way about the church and God and this and that in front of the camera. And then come to find out, she's lesbian, doing this, being unhealthy, all these different things or whatever, right? Like we have this thing where we put on a show and we believe that the show is what gets us there, forgetting that we actually have something greater on the inside of us that should get us where we're supposed to, right? So we believe in the show. We believe in the hooping and hollering, or hooting and hollering, right? But the hooping and hollering more so than we do in the words that are being produced. We believe in all these different things, but we're not actually looking at what the word itself says. And so, even going back to us with persons outside of the word and looking at the story of mankind, even after Revelation, you still see that we had a lot to offer and there's a lot to spread out, right? Even to the point to where this is also something a lot of persons, and this might make some feel uncomfortable, but even so-called white persons. Now, if you know what we teach here, whatever, we teach the truth about white, and that white is not even a color, right? White is the absence of color. It is see-through, right? It is bright. It is opaque. It is reflective, right? But white was not even considered to be a color until somebody decided to bring about something called racism, white supremacy, right? Even racism in its earliest structure is not white, right? But racism, white supremacy is white, right? Because it's focusing on a particular people at the top and making sure that those people own it, right? Racism before that is basically competition, a system of competition. And racism, therefore, in and of itself is not bad if the system is not rigged. But when the system is rigged, then we got to look at a certain thing or how the system is rigged. For example, somebody doesn't like what I'm saying, but if we're talking about, remember LeBron James and everybody talking about, oh, it's so terrible that a parent would do something like that and get his child in and he's taking away somebody else's job. Where meanwhile, the owners of the team do that all the time. You think Jeannie Buss became who she became because she was just a manager that earned it? Or because her father was like, I'm going to leave this in somebody's hands, and he looked around his own children and said, Jeannie's the one I can trust, right? Her being his child required him to train her, right? But her being his child, also in his mind requires her to give her the business, to give his children parts of the business, by the way, too. Just because they weren't the leader doesn't mean that they didn't get a percentage, right? So you'll have persons tell you and I that like that's a bad thing, and how dare somebody give something to their children and stuff. No, my child should get things from me just because he's my child, right? He should get things from me just because he's my child. So, right? But we're talking about a nation. So when I say white, for those who are coming in for the first time, when I say white or white persons, white is a colonial construct or social construct, right? As far as it actually being a color, and as far as a person believing that they're white. Matter of fact, if you look on, those of you who are into sports, at 3 o'clock, I believe, I haven't watched it on TV in a long time, but 3 o'clock, I believe, you'll see Nick Wright. I'm forgetting Kevin Wiles and Chris Broussard. Chris Broussard is a so-called black man. That's how he would describe himself. And from Louisiana, from a lot of different places, whatever. Matter of fact, Broussard or Broussard, the French name. Um, but if you look at Chris Broussard's skin color and look at Nick Wright's skin color, and one says that they're black and the other says that they're not, we know what they mean. One has certain cultural prism of which they look at the world through and how they're seen regardless, right? While the other one can even be married to a black woman but still be treated like a white man, right? So I'm talking about the social construct. I want to make that clear because somebody might be hearing me for the first time and somebody might be thrown off by that. I'm talking about the colonial construct, the social construct, right? Somebody changed the definition, right? We don't like it when people lie. And then when you change the definition, that's what you're doing. Somebody outright changed the definition and lied to you and told you that there are persons who actually are a color called white. All right. I'm saying all that. I'm not going to go through that whole long spiel again. I'm just saying all that just so that it's on wax, so to speak, for this recording. I have to do it almost every single recording over and over again. But at least so that you know, hey, this is what we're talking about. When I use the word or the term whites, I'm not using it as far as the meaning, whatever. Now, if somebody did something and somebody did it because they thought white was real, and if we're saying you need to come out of that mindset thinking that white is an actual color, then so be it. Let's have that conversation. If you think that's right, that even if you think that might be the context, even if it might not be my context at the time, right? That's closer to what I'm talking about than it ever being because you're white, you're bad. All right? Everybody got that? I'm not going to explain it again. Salah. I just want to make sure it said those who know me, already, my heart. But so I've talked about that. So that being said, even Battuta even talks about so-called white persons, which gives us a whole different indication of what's going on, especially once again, now he's in the 1300s. And we're bringing this stuff up. I'm going to show you why it's going to be important that we go through all this stuff and that we bounce all this stuff around and that we get to certain time frames and certain belief systems and certain historical documents throughout the world. But just roll with me, right? So he talks about certain white persons. And the only thing he mentions about really skin color and his whole thing, and really about eye color, but definitely skin color and eye color put together, is when he gets up to Eastern Russia and discovers that there are Muslims just like him up there, right? But instead of looking like what not just Muslims to him look like, but everybody looks like to him, he goes, oh, but these Muslims, they have white skin and blue eyes, right? I'm sorry, what is it? A similar thing to Patreon, but it's called Kofi. I don't understand. I'm sorry. I apologize. Um, so that being said, where was I at? I'm sorry. So which means that as much as persons want to tell you what the world looked like, the truth of the matter is, because remember, even Battuta has also been through Cairo, which is Egypt, right? Right. So he's been in Cairo. He's been through the so-called Middle East. He's been through India. He's been through Africa all the way to West Africa. Remember, India is east of Africa. So if he went to Mali and all that, and he's from Morocco, and he's done the pilgrimage, you know, across the water right there over from Africa to what you guys want to call Middle East or whatever, but he's done the pilgrimage and gone over. So in all these different things that are going on, right, he's gone through all these different places. He's gone through parts of Europe, in Spain. He's gone through, and even a little further than that, but he's gone through parts of Europe. He's gone through Asia and China, and now he's in Russia. He's in Eastern Europe. And he says when he gets there for the first time, he doesn't even talk about this. I mean, he talks about Chinese persons looking different, but for real, if you know about the Bantu and you know about the Chinese, there's not really even much difference in between them and the way that they look. There's not even actually a difference. too much of a difference, like over time stuff happens, but you be honest, we know the connection there. That being said though, he says he gets up to Eastern Europe and for the first time he sees somebody who's he describes as having white skin and blue eyes. For the first time, right? Which means that somebody who's traveled the earth, now traveled the earth limited, right? We're not saying that he's been into Portugal and stuff like that, even though I might need to read again, maybe he did go places like that, but he went into certain parts of Europe. He went into, you know, certain parts of China and stuff like that, which means he went pretty far east. He went up into Russia. He went down. He was, he was down where you do the pilgrimage. He also came through Ethiopia. He's also been through the center of Africa. He's also been to West Africa. So a huge chunk of the earth at that time, at a specific place that we're talking about. And we also know that his people, Mansa Musa's people, right? He discovered that they were going over and they were sending ships to the to the west constantly, and sometimes they didn't come back. And we've come to find out that they had built neighborhoods in cities, great cities that persons thought were literally Mali over in South America. So this person is seeing all this and says, now once again, I'm not here to discredit anybody because of skin color, lack of skin color. I'm just giving you context. He goes through all that and makes it a point to tell us that he's never seen somebody that he considers to be white with blue eyes. Now the Eastern European, that's not even what a lot of you would consider to be white. If you know what I'm talking about, if you know sports, if you know Khabib is Eastern European. Now I'm not sure if he was the same Eastern European that was there back then, if I'll be honest, but more than likely he's not that far from it. So if you see Khabib, a lot of you would see Khabib and you would think like, oh yeah, he's a so-called white man, but you and his brothers and nephews and persons that he trains and stuff like that are coming out and starting to win all the fights now, you would think, oh yeah, they're so-called white, but you wouldn't put them as so-called white, would you? It's like back in the day. See, nowadays you see somebody Italian, you don't know the difference. But back in the day, somebody saw Italian, right? Or they saw the so-called, forgive me, I'm using terrible things that, we shouldn't use anymore, but I'm just giving to you, if you've heard these terms, you know what I'm talking about, right? If you saw an Italian with something, with a WAP feature, right? Depending on your age range or what you study, if you see somebody with that type of feature, you knew they were Italian. Nowadays, if you see somebody with that feature, you might not know. A lot of persons raised don't know the difference. And I'm not saying that's bad or not bad. I think you should know the difference, not to hurt persons, but just to be like, oh, okay, I see where you come from, right? And it's part of what I like about you. It's part of what I should know about you, right? Just like if somebody is the same color as me, but if they have straight hair, you have straight hair, cool. I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody when my hair grows. If I don't let it lock, it's very wavy. You would think something different of it, but it locks, and now it's different. Part of the reasons why sometimes if it looks different than other person's locks is because it's a different hair texture. We all are different, right? But I'm saying all those things to get back to this, right? I'm saying all those things to get back to this is that he makes it a point to say that I haven't seen white persons before when he gets to Eastern Europe. Some persons believe he never went, but he went off of somebody else's account. Even if that's the case, what he's saying is, I personally have never seen white persons. So I can't, so all I can do is go off of somebody else's references. I believe that he went. Others would tell you that he didn't. All those things being said, though, it shows us that this whole thing, as far as who we think is in Egypt, who we think is in some of the places in China and other places too that are telling you they're this, that, whatever, they weren't considered to be that back then, and we have to be careful. Just like today, when we're building a nation and we're saying who we are, now that's nationality, not so much on looks, but still, when we say that, yes, we can see who we are, part of that is the look, and we have to be honest about that part of the dialogue. And if you keep lying, if you keep changing the color and changing what persons look like and changing what their beliefs were and changing what they even have said or saying that they didn't have any knowledge to express this stuff for themselves, then you get caught up. And we want to know the truth, right? We got to reverse the curse. Reversing the curse means what? Revisiting the lie. And the lie we're talking about today, right? Really, it's not a lie. The person we're talking about today, the topic of today is Ibn Battuta. IBN Battuta or Battue or B. I said it wrong, but IBN Battuta. I think I spelled it with an E. Battute. I've seen a bunch of different spellings on it, but I believe that's the closest pronunciation. I'm probably not pronouncing it all the way correct, but Ibn Battuta, I believe, is how one would pronounce his name, right? So in getting all this stuff together, you have to recognize what's happening, what's going on, and we have to have honest dialogue. Once again, honest conversation. We don't like to have honest dialogue and honest conversation, but we must if we're going to actually stay true to the topic at hand. So we will come right back where I left off on that. Please give me a second. I need to just go inside real quick and make sure that we've got some charger cables to make sure that this stuff keeps on going. I got everything except the actual charger out here. Makes no sense. But I'll be right back, and we'll continue to talk about Ibn Battuta and his trip up to Eastern Rome. And hopefully I've kind of given enough for you guys to see so we can start bouncing around a little bit in the timeline of mankind and seeing what's going on in certain parts of the earth and seeing how this stuff is being affected. And when persons are telling you, oh yeah, I'm just Christian, or I'm just this, or it's just American exceptionalism, or lost cause, or manifest destiny, or all these different terms that you'll hear, doctrine of discovery, you need to know what was going on. A Negro versus a black person, because a lot of you think Negro means black, and Negro is considered to be a particular type of black person or particular type of brown or African person. Because if you go over to Spain and you say you're looking for Negroes, they're going to show you different persons than if you're looking for Moreno, right? I would be considered Moreno. They still wouldn't like me in Spain, but I'd be considered Moreno, right? But somebody who knows better, if they saw this, and especially if they saw me do this right here, for those of you who know where we're going to go there in a second. I'm going to go grab the charger stuff. But if they saw me in a hood, especially let it be a black hoodie, and then they saw me with some locks, and they saw me like this, and they heard me on the street corners speaking about the word, they would label me a Negro. And if they, and if they could, they would put me in a ghetto, because a lot of you don't know that ghettos came way before so-called Jewish persons were put in ghettos, but those aren't the original ghettos, right? So we're going to talk about all that in just a little bit, but allow me, hopefully no more than a couple minutes at the most, hopefully 30 seconds to a minute, but I'm going to run inside real quick, grab some stuff to make sure we still charging up and everything, and then we'll try to finish up in just a second. Thank y'all for being on. Appreciate you. I'll be right back. Okay, had to make sure that we don't lose you guys for the rest of our time. Is hopefully everybody been learning a little something, getting a little different thought process on some of these things that they tell us and teach us, and seeing why it's important that we should know the truth for ourselves. The truth makes and creates freedom for us all. Everybody see and hear me okay still? How you doing, David? How you doing, user 5531527803, etc.? Thanks for being part of the community. Alrighty. Let me see. Make sure everybody can see and hear us all right. Okay. So with even Battuta, we were talking about specifically getting to a place where we were having discussion as far as him saying that he didn't see anybody so-called white. Now, the reason why this is important, it doesn't mean that there's not somebody who could have been light skinned. Doesn't mean that they didn't have everybody was the same color exactly. But he's saying that when he's gotten to Eastern Russia, it's the first time he mentions color like that, meaning that, because he describes what men and women look like. Matter of fact, even Battuta, as somebody who was very lustful and stuff like that. And so him describing what men and women look like is not something that is not particularly new for him, but he never describes somebody as what he describes the European and Russian, right? And so, remember, this series is called Reversing the Curse Means Revisiting the Lie. So, in talking about some of the lies that we've been given, a lot of us have an issue when it comes to Ibn Battuta, because if we be honest, a lot of us, how can I say this? A lot of us have an issue with anybody talking about race or anything like that, because we've been sold a lot of nonsense. A lot of persons believe, for example, that Cleopatra was so-called white. And even that is a very interesting case study, because Cleopatra herself was not even, Cleopatra herself is not even considered to be white by our standards. Today you would consider her to be black. But she also was not African, although she could have possibly been mixed with somebody of African descent. But she also was not African. She's considered to be Greek. And by the way that works, as much as we just talked about this, and she was smart, she was cunning and stuff, she also came from a European family. And by the way, Europeans were not the only ones to do this. We know Kemetic persons did this. We know some Kushite dynasties did this as well, so we're not going to pretend. But hear what I'm saying, where she came from in Greece and stuff, it was not uncommon for one to marry their own, cousin, brother, sister. Matter of fact, in Rome, who would have been over everybody at the time, including her, in Rome, it's not uncommon, for brother and sister to be together at all. So she was married, matter of fact, to her own brother, even though who knows if they had done anything physical yet, because her brother, they probably forced them to, unfortunately, but, her brother was actually younger than her. And I don't know if she was the oldest, but she was the one that everybody thought was going to the throne. Her father told me, by the way, Cleopatra's name was Ptolemy, her brother's name was Ptolemy, her sister's name was Ptolemy. Anybody who was of the Ptolemaic dynasty, they were all named Ptolemy. Ptolemy, P-T, but Ptolemy, right? So all of them were from the Greek dynasty. They were all under Alexander the Great, which tells us that she's marrying into her own family, right? All of them become Ptolemies, every single one of them. It's hard to even go through her family tree, because every single one of them is named Ptolemy. So it's like Ptolemy did this, and Ptolemy gave birth to this, and Ptolemy actually was the brother of and sister of. There's very odd stuff that goes in there, right? That being said, though, she is of this Ptolemaic dynasty, and she is Greek, but she's also considered to be black. Now, that's interesting, that stuff is going on. Now with her, obviously we want to talk about time frame too. We're talking about over 1,000 years before we're talking about even Battuta, granted. Right? That being said though, that shows you that like the whole concept of black, white, whatever, first things first, all of us, no matter how light or dark we are, the further back we go into all of our story, the darker all of us become. And that's a fact. How you doing, Brother Cole? Right? You can be the most racist of races, and you still, through eugenics, have to find a way to prove that you evolved from so-called black persons. Right? We're actually going to talk about this tomorrow when we get into science. Right? But one of the things that's happened with science is everybody went away from spirituality into science because what science was supposed to do was it was supposed to differentiate the different persons. A lot of persons don't know that. What you call science today, there's a bunch of sciences that are out. Science is cultural. So a lot of persons use different things to show them what's going on scientifically and can get to very similar ending points, right, and belief systems at the end, right? But science initially, when everybody went away from it, was supposed to be something to differentiate. Like even if we don't go too far back, what is the reason? Let me ask a question. And today's kind of boring subject matter for many because it's more historical, but prayerfully it's hidden for those that needs to hit, right? But let me just ask you guys a question. Roll with me a little bit, indulge me if you will, in the chat. When it comes to America starting to teach evolution, evolution's been around. I don't know when America started teaching evolution, right? As far as in its classrooms, I know a lot of persons say that they became scientists after, but you'd be surprised how little America believes in some of the dribble that it gives you and some of the sciences it puts in front of you. But once again, we don't recognize where we are, and we think that what everybody in the West tells us is true. So, quick question for you: when did America even start teaching evolution in classrooms? How you doing, Birch? Thanks for being on. Oh, thank you, Sister Carla. I appreciate you. Right? Anybody know? Just indulge me if you can in the chat. Any platform you're on, I appreciate you. Does anybody know when they actually started teaching evolution in classrooms? Right? We use Ibn Battuta, I think, very well. Once again, 1,000-page book. A lot of other books you can read about it. A lot of other persons you can go to listen to it. I'm just laid out something for you guys to be able to look at. You said evolution almost got you. Yeah. Well, just quick question once again though. When do you think evolution began to be taught in the United States of America in classrooms? How you doing, August Star? Thanks for being part of the community. Because the way that they'll have, see, we don't have a time frame and a reference point for this stuff. It's important that we know the timing of this. Even though we are eternal, right? We stuck trying to get to eternity because a lot of you can't twist out of time. You can't open the combination lock. So I just want to help you out with some of this. Nobody even probably knows, right? I haven't seen anything in the chat. Okay, watch this. Watch this. You ready? They didn't even start teaching evolution in classrooms. I'm gonna help you out once again. I know somebody not gonna like blah blah. Just research. You right? If you're somebody who's like, I don't believe you, no problem. Just research. They didn't start teaching. You said you learned about it in middle school. Okay. They didn't start teaching evolution in the United States of America until basically Sputnik. If you're not aware of Sputnik, I believe it's the 1960s, if not it's the 1950s, but somewhere around there, Sputnik was sent into space, and there was a Cold War that was not just a brewing, but it was cooked, and Russia and the United States of America were going back on every single thing. All of a sudden, Russia. Now we don't know for sure, and there's some person that say that they staged it, right? But Russia supposedly put a dog in an astronaut suit and had it go around the Earth, right, inside of a capsule. Once this happened, that's when the United States of America came out and said, we're not going to let Russia beat us to the moon, and JFK came out with his speech. Now, what you should ask yourself is, why is that important? Right? Why is that even important? All right, Kofi, I hear you. But why? Why should I care? Right? Not a bad question. Why is that even important to what you're talking about? Well, the reason that it's very important is because when you're sitting there and you're going through all this stuff with evolution, the United States of America was supposed to be Christian nation, right? Part of American exceptionalism and all that, right? Christian nation. That's right. So in it being a Christian nation, that meant that the Bible supposedly was supposed to be what persons looked at, right, to see what was righteous and not. Correct? Right? The Bible was supposed to tell us what was righteous and what was not. Okay? That's what we're supposed. So we're supposed to be a Christian nation. But when Russia beat us, supposedly beat them. I'm not part of us anymore. But when Russia beat the United States to space, they looked at what Russia was doing, and Russia had long time since separated itself, right, from Christianity being the main thing, and they were trying their best to actually make the communist movement less spiritual, right? And so America, in trying to keep up with the Joneses, starts teaching evolution in classes, believing that if we teach evolution, it'll be the thing that allows our children to get smarter. That's why evolution is taught in your class, not because it's considered to be right or perfect. Evolution is taught in your class or in your child's class because supposedly it's supposed to, right? It's supposed to kick them in the high gear. Supposedly it's supposed to, make them greater, make them smarter. That's what they believe. That's why you were taught evolution. Right? Now we could talk about where evolution comes from and all that stuff, and we still haven't even gotten to that part. We always have to bring it up almost in every series because it's so pervasive, and persons don't want to even. But evolution was taught to you in school because it was supposed to help persons become smarter, especially with the space program. Now, how you doing, babe? My wife is on the Honorable Maya. As always, check her out on TikTok, YouTube, her website, and Pinterest at Bloom and Flourish. Not A&D, the letter N, Bloom and Flourish. She is a healer, herbalist, chemist, and biologist by degree, right? So evolution is there to teach you and I why we're supposed to be able to get out of. Evolution is supposed to be an excuse as to why it's okay to mistreat others. Thank you, man. Right? That's really what's there. Evolution is an excuse as to why you can mistreat others because, they didn't evolve correctly. They went away from science. Now, if you just backtrack, though, see, this is when it becomes even more uncomfortable, right? And we're going to go, we're using the Ben Battuta today, so we're going to make sure that we stay connected to him, right? But hear what I'm saying. So, in evolution, right? Evolution is supposed to be a correction. Evolution is supposed to be, oh yeah, even some Christians, right? Even some persons that you say share your beliefs with them, even some very Afrocentric persons, so they say, right? Will tell you, is one of them Kwame or Kabwa Kibwe? I think his name was originally Booker T something else. Was his last name Booker T something? Not Booker T Washington, but another one. He's still alive. But Kabwa Kibwe or whatever, he'll tell you that he's Afrocentric, but he says that everything happens through evolution, right? Evolution was something that was taught to ensure that basically you could come up. It was a war tactic, right? And even if you want to look at the war tactic, it goes together with so-called racism and white supremacy, right? It is a thought process that says that you're better because you evolved from something else. And at first they used to say that black men, if you go back to Charles Darwin and Darwinism, his book is literally named The Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Survival of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Right? Literally, that's the name of his book. Survival of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. That's what he means when he says the origin of species. So they believed at one point that different races, right? Race was interchangeable with the word species. They believed that races and species were interchangeable. So when you hear somebody talking about a species and evolution, they don't tell you that, oh yeah, this species was actually this race came out of this species. That's their belief system. You said a lot of things are part of daily life was intended for warfare, plastic, internet, yeah. Right, and it's ultimately for warfare. We're at war. This is at some point going to be part of the series. Don't forget, you are at war. You're in a battle every day, right? You're a battle for your mind and a battle for your heart and a battle for your mouth, your words, your culture, your language, your children. Right? Every day, somebody's trying to figure out a way to get in there. Right? But this is one of the things that are pervasive. So evolution was taught about racism, white supremacy, and in order to fight against the Russians to make sure that they were the best persons in the race, they set up a system that was similar, that at least they thought was similar to the Russians, that would have them outdo the Russians and be greater. So that's why you see a drop in so-called Christian values and stuff like that, because evolution was rushed into the classroom based off of something that helped upkeep racism, white supremacy, but also make sure that racism meant that the United States of America was in charge and not, in fact, Russia. And how you doing, Brother Alex? Right? So a lot of persons don't, we don't recognize this, but see, but this goes back even to a time. Now you got to go back to 1492. Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But who was he looking for? Who was Christopher Columbus looking for slaves? He was looking for Negroes, not just black folk. He was looking for Negroes. He brought a Negro or a Hebrew interpreter with him. Right? That's the reality. He brought a Negro or Hebrew interpreter, whichever one you want to look at it, brought him with him. It was like, hey, we're going to find Negroes. Right? We're looking for, we're looking for a specific nation. And if we go back past that, right, we're in the 1400s. And by the way, so actually we're going to kind of go around a few different places. You're going to roll with me, bounce with me a little bit. Bounce with me a little bit. All right? I don't know why I went Jay-Z there, but bounce with me a little bit. All right. So, you ready? Okay. So, I'm going to go around on the timeline. I'm going to try to give you the times as best as I can. Hopefully you're catching it. Right? So, he goes looking for Negroes. He goes looking for Israel, right? Same Israelites that they are, but if you go back further, same Israelites that they're starting to make slaves and put in ghettos in the 1300s and the 1400s. And by 1550, you're not even allowed to admit who Negroes are anymore, and you're not allowed to use the word Yehudi or Yehudie or Yehovah or Judah anymore. Okay? All right, so we're going somewhere because even Battuta, right, gives us a blueprint that so-called white persons, at least in his experience. Now, he hasn't been everywhere, but he's been Morocco, he's been to Mali, right? He's been to Ghana, he's been to Timbuktu, he's been on the pilgrimage of the Hajj, right? He's been to Ethiopia, he's been through Kemet, he's been through China, he's been through Mongolia, right? He's been in India, he's been in Eastern Europe, right? This is not to say he's traveled everywhere, but for 24 years, and when we say travel, he didn't get on a plane, he didn't get in the car, right? He's even had some instances to where he was out in front of persons, almost had his life taken a few times and stuff. Actually ended up homeless a couple times. At least so goes the story. We're not 100% sure if all that stuff is there. It's what he's saying, right? And this person who's seeing all this stuff that we'll use, once again, we'll use what he says to make so-called dark folk look bad. But we won't use what he said to make so-called dark folk look righteous either. Right? That's the trick. Just like Flavius Josephus was saying when he wrote his stuff, and nobody would believe him, and how he was tired of literally being an Israelite, saying that he was actually at some of these battles, and they wouldn't believe him about Israel's story, but they dang sure would believe him when it makes Rome look great. Now that's back in 70 AC, but we can see a pattern. In the 1300s, 1304. Now 1300s is when they're going to start putting Negroes into slavery. 1304 is when he's born, right? Somewhere around 1324 to 1330s when he's going to start traveling. We're going to see this book pop up 1355, right? 1355 is the book. Is when the book's written. Is when it's put out. Right? Now what happens afterwards? What happens afterwards? Well, if we just look at what the West teaches us, we still get some crumbs. Because from what the West tells you, the only thing you need to worry about is something called the Crusades. Now, we're going to do some research while I'm on because I want to make sure I get this correct. Now, the Crusades, there were many Crusades. That's why it's literally called Crusades, as in plural. But the Crusades start back in 1095. All right. You with me? You rolling with me? We're going to roll up our sleeves. I know this isn't the flamboyant message. This isn't the message that everybody says. Google says 50 or 60. Okay. Excuse me. Right? So the Crusades start in 1095. Pope Urban II. That's who started the Crusades. It wasn't the East. It wasn't Negroes. It wasn't Israel. It wasn't Israelites. It wasn't person with Israelite faith. It wasn't Muslims. It wasn't Salah ad-Din, who is way further in, right? It wasn't any of those. It was started by the West. It was started by the Roman Catholic Pope, Pope Urban II, right? It was at the Council of Clermont, if you want to look that up, to figure out what they were doing there, right? And it is basically, supposedly, this is supposed to be the Byzantine Empire who was asking for help against the Turks. And they wanted to reclaim the Holy Land. But the reality is that Pope Urban, this is what you'll be taught. The reality is that Pope Urban II actually was very busy trying to get his hands on Jerusalem, period. And really, not even just for Jerusalem, period, but, you wanted to get your hands on it because it makes whoever's there, basically, is supposed to be the boss. But also, one of the reasons why, they do this is because when you look at what's happening, especially back then, you're talking about 1095 with Pope Urban II. When Pope Urban II makes his decree, basically Europe, as still is happening today, if we be honest, Europe is cannibalizing itself. Right? Europe is eating itself up. Europe is fighting against Europe so much, right, that he's losing power because he has power as long as he has power over Europe. Right? And he was actually considered to be the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Emperor, if you don't know, that goes back to Rome having two Romes. So Rome is still around. The Byzantine Empire is basically Eastern Rome, right? The Ottomans and what you call Orthodox Christianity. And then you had Western Rome, Roman Catholicism, and at this point, Protestantism hadn't become a thing yet. So you have Roman Catholicism, that's Christianity. And still at 1095, you still have the same thing. Now that happened officially in 538 AC, I believe. That happened officially at 538 when the two were split apart. So we're, about 500 years past that, coming up on, we're like 550 years past that, 560 years past that. We're about there. So that's how long this has been in place, to where Eastern Rome, the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, they're considered to be Eastern Rome. And still, until the 2020s, as a matter of fact, certain places in the so-called Turkish Empire still consider themselves to be Rome. They still call themselves Rome. So it's important that you catch that, because a lot of persons, once again, some persons are so Americanized, or some persons are just so into like small glimpses, or some persons don't know any better. And so what will happen is we'll say, oh, okay, Rome is old. Rome is ancient. Nobody really cares about Rome like that, whatever. When the reality is that Rome not only is still around, but there are persons who still identify as Roman, still to this day. Right? So there are still persons who identify as Roman to this day. It's not just as simple as America is Rome. No, Rome still exists. Rome wasn't built in a day, and guess what? That means it didn't go away in a day. It's the Roman Catholic Church that has a lot of Rome's wealth, but don't get it twisted. Rome is still around. Right now, it's just officially the iron. Rome is mixed with the clay. The Bible, to the point to where Christianity and other persons who are dabbing into Christianity here or there are having issues trying to follow. Right? But anyways, so Rome, or so Eastern Rome, the Turkish Empire, is like, we want Israel. Can you help us? Right? Western Rome, right? Pope Urban II, Western Rome, at the Council of Clement, says, okay, we need to stop cannibalizing each other here because I'm losing power, right? How about this? We'll make a decree that anybody who helps out and helps us get what's going on over there, they'll be allowed to die and have 40 virgins and all that. A lot of you think that that's a Muslim thing. That's actually a Christian thing, right? It's a Muslim thing. You will receive 40. You were taught, it's a Muslim belief system. You were taught that all this stuff that they tell you is the normal Muslims' everyday life, which is not. They'll tell you, teach you this stuff, and you think that, okay, for a lot of Muslims, which is really crazy that we would do this, but especially from back with Osama bin Laden, they brought that back. All the Muslims, they're doing everything because they believe that everyone that dies can get 40 virgins and and this and that, as if that's what all Muslims believe, and even as if that's what all Muslims that fought with Osama bin Laden believe, right? But that's even further burst a lot of our bubble. I'll leave that alone for today. But yeah, we were taught this stuff, and the reality is, if you go back to 1095 AC, you discover that it is a I'm sorry. If you go back to 1095 AC, you'll discover it is a Christian Pope who says that and gets the ball rolling on all those things, right? Right. I believe he did it at the end of 1095, right? And it was the thing was for Christians to take up arms against the Turks. Okay. So then in 1096, persons left. Right? They kept fighting until 1099, in which they captured Jerusalem. But now, watch the story of it. So this is basically Christian Muslim fight to a certain degree. Obviously, Israel and wars and stuff were involved in there. But how we will remember it is Christian versus Muslim. And the fight is going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Right? Israel is not being told about in this fight back and forth, by the way, either. So this whole modern thing of, oh yeah, they just, no, it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Then eventually, once you finally get past that, right? Once you finally get past this back and forth, this thing keeps on going. Now remember, Christopher Columbus is going to sail the ocean blue in 1492. What they fail to teach you is the connection to the Crusades. So the Crusades were fought not only from 1095 to 1099, but a bunch of them were fought. So you have the Crusades going basically up until the 1300s, right? The 1300s, during the time Ibn Battuta is there. So for persons that say, oh yeah, persons in Israel or persons in the Middle East or persons, they always look like they look now. That's not the truth, right? Are you catching that? Are you catching the importance? It's about to. You got to catch that one. It seems like I'm not going anywhere. I promise. We're laying down the foundation because I promise now it might finally flip for you if it hasn't flipped already where we're headed. Because the persons who were there the whole time, right, are not the persons who are there today. I'm not just talking about Israel, right? I'm talking about who you even consider to be Turkish now, right? And who you even consider to be Iranian, Iraqi, stuff like that. There are persons that are there that are indigenous, and there are persons that are there that are not, just like today. Why is that extremely important? Why is it what Ibn Battuta is telling us? Why is it extremely important that we catch that this stuff has been changed, that somebody lying to us? Because this means that the identity of these people are hidden from us until we actually acknowledge that it was hidden. Right? I'm going to say that again. That sounds so simple, but Holy Spirit just dropped the bar. I'm going to say it again. See if you catch it. And today, we're talking about, in our series, Reversing the Curse means revisiting the lie. Right? And what we're talking about today is Ibn Battuta. We talked about a lot of stuff that he wrote out through history and stuff like that and everything. But I want you to catch. Hopefully you catch what I'm saying. Oh, thank you, babe. I appreciate that. Right. So I want you to catch this. This was back and forth, and the Crusades kept going back and forth. There were multiple Crusades fought up until the 1300s. Right. Even Battuta, right, is born 1304. He writes the book. The book is out 1355. Okay? So the book is out 1355. Why is that crucial to seeing what happens with the spread of Christianity and untruths and things that are untrue about ourselves, especially with chattel slavery coming up? Why is that important with all the stuff that we just said and talked about? Why is it crucial that we realize the lie? Or how is it that we can even know, Kofi, how did what lie are you talking about? I haven't really caught the lie. I mean, I've caught some of them, but I'm missing them, right? Thank you, Sister Cherry, right? But how? Where are we going to? What are we trying to do? Because you need to know once again that something's hidden from us, right? Or if we don't ever tell the truth about what's been hidden, it will remain hidden, right? That's not exactly what I said, but that's what I'll go with, right? If we don't admit the fact that something has been hidden from us, then it remains hidden. That's right. We will understand what's going on and how to stop it, reverse it. That's right, right. So if we don't admit that it's hidden, in other words, if I were to play hide and seek with my son, and he were to bring out a big green blanket, a brown blanket because it's fall, whatever, and he were to put it on the ground, and camo blanket, were to cover himself up, put it on the ground. If I know that he's under the blanket, I keep pretending like he's not. If somebody asks me about it, they don't know that we're playing hide and seek, and they say, "Hey, how's Solomon doing?" And I say, "Oh yeah, he's fine. He's at the house." Somebody who doesn't know that he's outside, right, under the thing, they just know, oh, okay, he's there at the house. So it's hidden in plain sight. Somebody else might not see him. They might walk past, and they might not see he's covered in the blanket or whatever. They might not see him do that. He might be doing a really great work at staying still. I know that he's there, but somebody else might not. And if they talk to me about him and I don't ever address the fact that he's right there in front of us hiding, then it's still hidden from us, even if I know better. Right? Why am I saying this? Because there's a lot of stuff that even though we know better, it's still hidden. Right? We know that even Battuta has written 1,000 pages based off of his own personal experiences off of 24 years, had somebody write down what he said word for word, and they worked on it for 2 years and then wrote another book to update that to make sure that all the gaps were filled in, right? But still, we'll have persons tell us that we have no way of being able to fact check because it's not European enough. But even if we look at what they say, and how you doing, Brother Copeland? How you doing, Lockdown? Even if we look at what others have taught us and told us we're supposed to go by, if we just look at it. So once again, 1095, you start by Pope Urban II. Pope Urban II started, the Christian Pope, started a war against those persons that were in Israel who've been living there. Right now, by this time, the persons that are living there aren't all the way Hebrew either, if we want to keep it a buck. Because that time, that ship sailed, right, back in 70 AC, right? So you've had over 1,000 years of all types of persons in and out, in and out, in and out. But there still are a lot of indigenous persons that are there, right? That doesn't get flushed out all the way until basically, World War II. It's just about it. Then they start deporting the rest of us, right? That found a way to stay there for, 70 AC for almost a couple thousand years, right? 1,900 years. So, that's when they started getting rid of the rest of us, right? However, and there's still a small, very small, but small indigenous population that's there, really going through. And all the stuff that's been talked about, nobody talks about us, of course, as usual, right? Why would you talk about the so-called black person? But in all the stuff that we're going through and talking about, if we be honest about it, 1095 up through the 1300, sorry, through the matter of fact, hold on, let me look this up. Let me look this up because it's going to give me, you got to know how to look for this. Okay, so they'll say that the Crusades ended in 1291, right? But the problem is that crusading, right? That's actually a word they used to use, a term they used to use. How you doing, blessed one? Thanks for being part of the community. They actually used to call it crusading, and so crusading kept on going, even if the Pope was not officially making it keep on going. You have to recall this, and one of the ways that we have, so technically they'll tell you that the Crusades stopped, or at least the last major Christian stronghold in Acre, or it's really spelled like Acre, Acre. The Mamluks defeated it in 1291. But crusading or fighting for this thing, or saying that, hey, this is ours because we're so-called white, it's ours because we're Christian, it's ours because of Jesus, etc., that kept on going. And the reason we know this is because of Queen Isabel herself, the same one that sent Christopher Columbus in 1491. Well, you said, well, then something's wrong in the history books that they're telling you and I that 1291 was the end of the Crusades, and that's very true. How can, because Queen Isabel makes a statement. Isabel, please forgive me if I'm saying, but the one who directed Christopher Columbus to come over to the Americas, right? She makes a statement that's very powerful because she says she looked up to the Crusaders that were her family members. Crusaders like her uncle, Crusaders like her grandfather, Crusaders like her father. She looked up to them in the Crusades. And remember, when she fights the Moors and wins in 1491, her and her husband, they came together to make Spain bigger. And then the last third of what you call Spain today, at the bottom, they had to defeat the Moors to get that. So she thought of the liberation of the Spanish people, even though most of the persons that were there, especially in the South, are Moroccan or Moorish, are Negro, are black, are African, et cetera, right? But in her mind, she was still fighting the crusade. And she's fighting the same crusade that her parents' generation fought and her grandparents' generation fought. How do you have that happen if she's fighting for independence, crusading, and see, she's doing it in the name of Jesus, crusading. She's crusading in 1491, but the last crusade, they tell you, officially happened in 1291. The Crusades, in other words, is the beginning of persons saying that because we are white Christians, we have the right to manifest, or I'm sorry, to the doctrine of discovery, and therefore manifest destiny, and therefore the white man's burden, and therefore American exceptionalism and Christian nationalism, et cetera, et cetera. Right? That's the journey. It's deep. Come on, the rabbit hole always runs deep, sis. you know, it's deep. How you doing? Oh, I said blessed one already. Thanks for being on. Right. So catch that, beloved. Are you seeing all that? Are you seeing all that? How that comes together? Are you seeing all that? How that comes together? You have all this stuff. Even Battuta is in the midst of all this and tells you exactly what stuff looked like, including even the plague, the bubonic plague that came over from Europe. He's outrunning the plague before he finally comes back home to Morocco, and then it's sent down to Mali with Musa, with Mansa Musa. Right? He tells you that in all the journeys that he's having in the 1300s, he's not seeing so-called white persons. But all of a sudden, there's starting to be a thing where they're coming over not only in the 1300s to the west to get Negro slaves, and they're getting Negro slaves in Europe, right? Negro different than African. They will later on start looking for African and Negroid slaves. Negroid is not Negro, though. They look like Negroes, but they're saying they're Negroid, right? They use these terms. But then you're seeing now they're going down to Israel in the 1000s, right? And you're seeing, so they've been trying to fight since the 1000s, trying to take over that. And you're starting to see that now it's becoming a thing to where, okay, the Negroes are getting locked up for being Negro, right? You've had this whole war going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. On top of that, right, you've been told in history books how so-called white persons were always there, but he's telling you he didn't see anybody that looked like a so-called white person. He doesn't notice somebody with white, so-called white skin and blue eyes and straight hair up until he gets into Eastern Russia. So during this whole thing, you're seeing two different stories. You're seeing that persons are telling you we don't even have a story, and then you're seeing somebody who represents us telling you, oh yeah, like, I don't even know all this stuff they're saying. He doesn't even really mention. I mean, he mentions, that's not a lie. That's a lie. He does mention Christians, right? But the Christians that he mentions are ones who have been converted when they've come into contact with Europeans, or they are followers of the way. He mentioned there's two different, even back then. So that in of itself even shows us that followers of the way, Negroes, people who believe in Torah, persons that have locks, etc., they're mentioned over and over and over again. And even Mansa Musa, once again, Musa's name means Moses. Now that shouldn't be too new to you guys, because too much of them, because obviously Muslims believe in Moses. But that being said, they, he's his name is even Moses. You're having a Hebrew name, or at least a dialect of Hebrew, somebody being named that you're having a big discussion about in the final 2 years of Ibn Battuta's 24-year journey. It's literally centered around Mali and what he learned from somebody who was a Muslim by religion, but was a Hebrew or an Israelite by blood, by DNA. You're having all these things happen. And meanwhile, while even Battuta is saying all this stuff is going on, we can see, okay, so there's a Christian thing happening here. There's all this stuff going on. There's a war now that's happening. There's the Crusades that are going on. And then on top of that, you have Negroes that are already in the 1300s being persecuted. You have the first, not the first slave ship, but the first slave ship sent by England to Africa during this time is going to come into effect. It's called Jesus, right? That's what it was called. Jesus, that's what it was called. They sent it over for slaves. They're doing all types of stuff in the name of Jesus, iron and clay. And we as the clay have to make sure that we are aware that they're sending these things. It's not just because somebody's a stranger that we have to be aware. We have to be aware of the stranger if they still bring the strange behavior. If they become part of us, then the strange behavior shouldn't be strange. But if somebody becomes estranged to us or is strange to us, we got to figure that out real quick. Right? And so a lot of persons miss. But yeah, so while all this is going on, he's telling you, no, this is what I see. He's saying straight up, this is what's seen. You can't tell me by my own eyes. I've seen from Russia all the way down basically into the center of Africa, and I've seen over into China, right? I've seen China, India, all this stuff lined up. I've seen Spain on the other side. I'm telling you from what I've seen, even, and watch this, he was going to fight against the Spanish. And he doesn't describe them as looking like blonde hair, blue eyes, white skin, which means that even they weren't considered that back then. Right? Even they weren't considered that back then, which means that you have to talk about something that we don't like to talk about a lot, but it's weird we don't. It's not a bad thing, but we just don't bring this into the equation. Where if we're gonna talk about stuff, we got to talk about you know person's traveling patterns. Right? Forgive me. What is it? Hold on. I'm having a moment here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, we can use it. So yeah. So we're not animals, but we do this. Believe it or not, we as human beings have something called migration patterns. Right? Like animals migrate during certain times of the year, stuff like that. We as human beings migrate as well, and you can tell where a lot of persons are. For example, right? If you ever go to Illinois, if you ever go to Wisconsin, you're going to discover really quickly, right? That a lot of your people, if you are from there, a lot of your people are really from Mississippi and are Choctaw, Native American, right? You're going to find that the reason that is because there was a migration that happened. One of the migrations happened when persons were sent across, on the Trail of Tears, and some persons left there and went up north. Also, too, it is a African man with a Native American wife. Both you would consider both to be black if you just look at their color, but an African man and a Native West African man, Native American wife with a Native American wife, who came up and actually put what you know as Chicago, created Chicago, the city of Chicago. But there's also others that came up after that. But then also a lot of persons who lived in Mississippi, when they went up north, they didn't go up north to Washington, D.C., and to New York and all that. They went up north to Chicago. Migration, right? So if I hear somebody and I listen to them close enough in Chicago, a lot of times they'll sound like they sound in Mississippi. How is that? Because they migrated, right? Where they migrated tells me a lot about them, and also too, if I pay attention to where they came through, then I'll probably figure out that they came through some things when they went through Tennessee. They probably came through some things when they went through Indiana. There was some learned behaviors. Matter of fact, there's some things in Gary, Indiana, that are shared with some folk in Chicago, Illinois. Right? If I look at it, if I look at the migration, or even the migration, movement that would have happened, right, and the patterns that happened over the years, I can discover what's going on with the people. Right? It's not that difficult. If I know a lot of us North Carolinians and South Carolinians, a lot of persons from North Carolina, right? Especially if you go to Washington, D.C., there's a joke that says if you go to D.C., D.C. stands for deep country, right? Deep country, because basically if you got people from D.C. and you're so-called black, you're more than likely your people come from the Carolinas, right? Maybe they come from somewhere close to the Carolinas, maybe even a little bit of tip of Georgia, maybe tips of Tennessee, stuff like that. But you're gonna see, yeah, if you Virginia, all that stuff, DC is deep country. That's what they call it, right? If you go to Miami, right? If you go to a lot of parts of Florida, you're gonna find a lot of persons that are from New York, right? We can tell where a lot of stuff. We can tell by your accents and other things, but also too, before I get there, I can make an assumption just based off migration patterns that if I go to Florida, I'm probably going to run into a few persons from New York, more than likely older. If I go to Georgia, I'm probably going to run into some persons from D.C. Hence, even the language, when you hear somebody talking about mumbo sauce, or you hear somebody talking about that joint is like this, that joint like that, instead of joint, that joint. It's really that joint, right? But, if you hear somebody say that in Georgia, I know where you came from, right? But also I know the migration patterns, if you will. If you go over to California, I'm probably going to see some older guys who are actually from the East Coast at one point. A lot of cats on the East Coast, even though they come back, to live, stuff. But you see a lot of them that go over to Cali, right? There ain't a lot of cats in Cali trying to live in New York like that, like that, right? But because of this pattern. Oh, hey, Wall Puncher. I guess it was kind of creative attempt, but it's kind of trash. You can try again in about 30 minutes if I'm even still on. Probably won't be. right, right. But nice try though. Thanks for being on. Nevertheless, so we can tell by migration patterns stuff that happened. Okay. So now, well, let's see what's going on. Persons have been going back and forth. By the way, we don't like to talk about this as well, but let's talk about this. See, this series is going to be rich. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But it's going to hit because in this series we're going to have to also go through the fact that you've been taught that the riffraff are holy. Mm-hmm. Right? You were taught that the riffraff, you were taught that the fools, you were taught that the persons who, R-word women and stuff like that, that they're the ones that we're supposed to look up to and praise. That's why you like Abraham Lincoln. He's slaveholder. That's why you like Thomas Jefferson. Famously did all types of wild stuff to his slave women. That's why you like Abraham Lincoln. His wife actually was black by the one drop blood rule, but she faked, that she wasn't. Right? But you were taught all these guys who were terrible human beings, you're supposed to uplift. There's somebody out there who would say Pope Urban II in 1095 deserves to be looked at as great because he started the Crusades, when the reality is that's the furthest thing from the truth. You said we'll talk that lobster was a rich person's food when it's just a bottom feeder. I mean, well, that too, of course. Just like everybody wants, people will pay $30, $40 for some chitterlings. We've been trying to get away from them things for a minute, right? Or the same thing with pho. If you like pho, it's poor folk food in Vietnam. Something that they could make, something that take them a minute to stew or whatever, but something they can make. They could get stuff real easy from nature and make it anywhere they were. Now it's something that some places charging you $20, $30 a bowl, right? I'm still kind of sort of new to the pho life as far as I don't think I even got introduced to it until Elder Maya took me to have some for the first time when we've been together for a couple months, if that. I think we met up in at some pho place or went to some pho place, but even that poor folk food, yeah. So a lot of that too, but ultimately what I'm saying is look at the migration pattern. If you look at the migration pattern, these persons going back and forth, fighting for something that doesn't really belong to either side, if we be honest, but fighting, and eradicating things along the way. And then all of a sudden you start getting things that were in Europe to go to other places. When they start taking over certain places and lands that are not European, all of a sudden you start seeing plague and other things make its way down, even into Africa, right? And all these things are being done. But once again, going back to Isabel said that her father's generation, right, her father's generation and her grandfather's generation had crusaded. Now remember, crusading is a term that we don't get taught, but crusading is the act of going on the crusade. It's like persons don't know that that being a Viking, like maybe for a couple of cities, but for real, a Viking people is not a real thing. The profession was to go Viking. So a Scandinavian that went and pillaged everybody, they were Viking while doing so. They were going Viking to mess over persons. When they got Viking lands later on, those were fat cats who had ate off everybody so much and had scared the Franks so much that the French were like, hey, just take this land over here and do what you do. And they gave him the worst of the worst. But the guy was like, oh, you're going to make me king and you'll pay me a tribute and you'll let us do whatever we want? He was like, I'll try this thing out. But there really was no such thing as a Viking country, right? To say that somebody is a Viking is like to say that, to say somebody is a Viking is like to say somebody is, I, I don't know, I don't know which team is best, whatever. To say somebody is a Viking is like saying somebody is um, a football. I say it like that, right? Like a football player could even be known as a Viking, right? But a Viking football player is not an actual Viking, right? That's his profession that he does. He's called Viking, right? So they were pillagers, right? And when they pillaged, that was their job description. If somebody were to look nowadays and say, "What is your job description?" Give me a resume. They would have shown how much pillaging they did, how much off in prison they did, how faithful they were to their assignments, how they took care of their men. That was a profession. It was like almost like a pirate. They don't like to call it piracy, but it's basically piracy, right? That's what Vikings, were. They were basically pirates. But not every Scandinavian or every person of the country that came from was a Viking. Those who had that profession, they went Viking. They went Viking. So it's the same thing. When we say somebody was a crusader, crusaders went crusading. But a crusader is not necessarily an Englishman. A crusader is not necessarily a Frenchman. A crusader is not necessarily Portuguese. A crusader is not necessarily Croatian, right? They're not necessarily Russian, but they can go crusading, right? So we never look at a crusader as being part of a nation, right? If anything, the crusaders were supposed to fight on behalf of the nation of the Roman Catholic Church of Western Rome and of Eastern Roman Catholic Church too, or of the Eastern Catholic, the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? That's what, yeah, and thank you. A temporary endeavor, like a profession or like a robber. Yeah, a robber, you wouldn't say somebody robbed, so therefore they're from the country of rob, right? A robber goes robbing, right? But he can be, a French person. He can be He can be Chilean, etc. Okay, so this is what goes on. So these persons are still crusading, even if they want to tell you and I the last major. Now they have to say the last major because they know that it's not true. But they'll say the last major part of the Crusades was 1291, right? But you still have 1491, 200 years later, is when you still see that they are crusading, right? They're taking over Spain in the name of Jesus. That's what they're doing. They're taking over Spain in the name of Jesus. That's what's going on there, right? I had to look that up for you, brother Alex. I'm not 100% sure. So even though many of them would and could, right, and still are family-wise, but I'd have to look up specifically who, and what, to be honest, and I still might not have an answer for you, but that's a great question. Just now, especially because we're getting close to the time, I just want to try and put this on. I might be a few minutes over. We normally end at the top of the hour, so if you have a few minutes to spend with us past that, thank you for doing so. If not, I appreciate you and thank you for being on. But when you go back to that, you have to realize now that the crusading is still going on in 1491, and so really, when they've already started looking for Negroes, right, in the 1300s, early 1300s, like probably 1330s or so. So not early, but like 1330s or so. They're already looking for persons to enslave just because they're Negro, which shows you Balaam doctrine, wickedness, some other things going on. Right? By the time you hit 1491, the crusading is no longer about um, doing stuff in the name of Jesus, just simply because of that, or as far as Europe, as far as some of the what we call Middle East and other stuff, because that stuff kind of is what it is at this point. And enough Europeans have gotten the power and stuff, or even if some puppet is in power, they have enough persons already in place. So what do you do from there? Well, they started going looking for Negroes, and then when they couldn't find Negroes in West Africa, they started looking for Africans as well. But then you also see they start going across to where they've heard that we as a people have been going for years. Christopher Columbus was hired because he had heard from East Africans that West Africans already knew how to get over to the so-called New World, which means it wasn't new, but that's what you and I still call it today, because that's the power of propaganda, right? The power of propaganda is something else, where you literally know that there's persons of Mali who built a whole nation, and there's like 5 or 6 other African nations literally talked about in Central America just by itself. And you have Omekshi and all the heads and everything telling you what we were, and some of them still have the paint jobs on us showing them as black folk and stuff like that. And yet we still have this issue, believing that it's possible that some of us were not only already here, but some of us had already came over from Africa and didn't need a slave trade to make that happen. See, somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson, that's how we know what time he's on and what side he's on, because Neil deGrasse Tyson literally will come on and tell you guys that it's great that Christopher Columbus came over, as much as the jerk that he was, because there were 2 different types of human being on the planet, and if we had kept letting it go on, we would have gotten so far away from each other as far as our humanity. So that's why it's important that we had the great old slave master come on over and kindly and gently, here we go to soft show, right? Come on over and make sure that we had that. The problem with that is, though, is that we know that not only were Africans coming over, we know not only were, not just, by the way, West Africans, we know that Africans that came over from Kemet, we know that that Polynesians, Austronesians, and Melanesians are the same persons, and we know that even they themselves had come through. We know that Chinese persons had been over on the West Coast, yes, way before Russia even. We know that Russia obviously was over to a certain degree. We know that even Scandinavians, Vikings, actual Vikings of the profession of going Viking came over, right? Leif Erikson came over, and Leif Erikson is Eric the Red Sun, right? That's the actual very Viking thing to do, is who's your daddy? Oh, your daddy's Earl? Okay, your last name is Earlson, right? They were, because last names is somewhat new, a somewhat new invention as well, right? So, but yeah, so Eric the Red Sun was over. Leif Erikson had came over. We know that the slave trade happened because even before they tell you, because remember how they used to teach you in school that for Thanksgiving, we have to talk about that soon because it's coming up. But you remember how they used to teach you in school that Thanksgiving was this great event. And matter of fact, that some of your schools even used to teach it exactly like this. That they if they wouldn't outright say it, they would say that the Puritans said that it was a blessing from God that um, I'm forgetting his name. That Tonto could speak English so well, but they never tell you that Tonto, real name Tisquantum, was actually a slave taken from the Americas, was taken all the way back to he was taken over through Spain and then was sold to an Englishman, and more than likely was able to purchase his own freedom, if not outright was allowed to go back, but more than likely purchased his own freedom and was able to go back, and then was so messed up that he tried to betray the Native Americans that were over there against the persons that were coming and become slave masters of them as well. But you'll be taught all this weird stuff, and nobody wants to tell you the reality. Like, we have evidence of not only what the world was looking like and how it functioned, but we know timeline how to put this stuff in order. Like, we know now, like that's one of the things that they've taken away from us, is they tried to take timeline away. But now we have timelines, so you can't lie to me anymore and tell me, oh well, nobody knew anything about slavery. If you say that everybody dealt with slavery, then you can. I'm gonna try to be quick, like I said, right? Hopefully, I won't go past 11:10, right? Hopefully, I won't go past 11:10. But can I just throw this out here real quick? Be careful of persons that will immediately give you, and obviously for many different reasons. I'm talking about for a particular reason. How you doing, T's 2 cents, Tavares? And how you doing, Empress Linus? Please be careful when you have persons that do this weird thing. I'm sorry, would you say there was lighter and darker tribes because many people already came to the Americas? Well, that, and the fact that once again, even if somebody's a dark-skinned tribe, somebody that's dark-skinned within themselves can have different various colors, right? We usually try to bring up the color thing because unfortunately what's happened is obviously persons were told that all these persons were white and white and white and blah blah, and yes, there are copper colored persons, and copper does come in different colors, and we are aware of that. And yes, even with all that being said, obviously you have the Inuit persons and stuff like that who are in the snow and are native. And if you want to go by just color by itself, obviously we know there's other features that come with the stuff, but if we want to just go by color, that's why we know that color within itself is not a proper indication, right? Just by itself, right? Just like you could be two people that are the same family and both of you can be the same color, and I'm sorry, you can have two people that are the same color, have a lot of the same features, even standing next to each other, and don't have the same DNA. That being said, though, color is an indication that we can use, especially for certain groups, because even within those certain nations, there's usually a consensus, right, as far as we're this or we're that. But anyway, yeah, so I'm with you on that. But ultimately, what I'm trying to get to, I'm sorry, when we talk about, and yes, could there have been persons that mixed together, even though we don't know 100% if that even happened with certain groups that came over. But yeah, with the Chinese, more likely it did. With some of the Europeans, do we know? Probably not until chattel slavery. There are some persons who came over, like with Englishmen and Puritans, and maybe even some Spanish and stuff, that decided they wanted to leave and become Native American. That did happen, of course, too. But I'm just saying, ultimately, right? The lie that's been told. At least the lie that's been told more, right? Because there's a lot of lies that's been told, but the lie that's been told more often than not is, hey, these persons weren't dark. These persons had no color. These persons were stupid because they were dark colored, right? I'm not saying that nobody's ever done the opposite, but I'm just saying we don't really have television shows, a history of television shows that come on and say that have the white version of Bojangles, right? If anything, we like the white version of Bojangles. What's his name? He could dance too. I'm not making fun of him. The guy, I can't remember his name right now. A guy who Michael Jackson emulated and imitated a lot of his stuff, especially for Smooth Criminal. Is Gene Kelly I'm thinking about, and a couple others. Obviously, I don't mind saying Frank Sinatra can sing, even if he ain't singing like something that we think is soulful or this and that. But he can definitely sing and stuff like that. But I'm just saying, as far as the belief system that's out, is usually going to be attached to what, like, you stupid because you're black, or you can't do it, or you couldn't have had a civilization, or there's no way you guys could have traveled. Well, we'll say that Leif Erikson traveled, and we'll even tell you that he came down, probably didn't do anything, but hey, that's believable for us. But we won't say Chinese people traveled. We won't say You know, Ghanaians travel. We won't say that Mali traveled. We won't say that Kemet traveled. We won't say. Matter of fact, if you look up Kemet and I'm forgetting the original name of two countries they put together now. One African country sounds very similar to it, but there's a in Polynesian and Melanesian and Austronesian culture, you can't even talk about the people who left to go out and start swimming the seas until you first go back to Africa, right? So, so yeah, well, yeah, Michael, Copy, James, and all that. Yeah, so and we all get it from somewhere. But I'm saying ultimately, right, that the point that we get is that many persons attack because the system is based off of attacking the Negro, and the Negro attack. If the Negro is attacked when he is attacked, when she is attacked, then that means the Negroid is attacked, right? And then that also means if you stand with the Negro, you are attacked. Now, once again, does it mean that you can't be a Negro if you're not dark skinned and blah blah? No, right? But what we're saying is that we can see it like we can see in the Bible. It says Samson had locks. Somebody will come behind that and tell you why Samson is white. Somebody got to say something's up with that, right? We can see very clearly, right? It doesn't say Christ's feet were the color of copper. I'm not saying you can't be copper colored and be lighter copper, but it doesn't say Christ's feet were the color of copper. It says his feet were the same color as copper as if it was burnt in the furnace, right? The same description given to so-called dark black persons who are described as being Moors, right? In the same time frame with even Battuta by a so-called called white European um, historian, right? You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? So you have to pick up on those things. So like when somebody says more, right? More doesn't mean black. It become the meaning of it became black because all Moors basically were black in the eyes of those who were learning about Moors. So Moors could be, in fact, black. They could be light-skinned black. They could be Asian black. They could be, whatever, all these terms we want to put together because people think that mixed race is a thing. Your family is your nation. So when do you mix a nation together? It's odd, right? Like somebody marries into a nation, somebody doesn't. We're still in a really crucial kind of whacked out mentality, right? But that being said, yeah. So we definitely know of all those things, but the reason for the focus on it, at least for today, is because and we have to be fair on both sides, but also too, we have to realize that the system we're in is dedicated to the oppression of the Negro/Negroid people because when you're going for the Negro, it's not just because they're black, it's because you're going for the Negro, right? Because they have a promise, right? So when the Negro has the promise, right? When the Negro has the promise on him, hey, how you doing, Sister Michelle? And I'm sorry I'm missing comments and stuff out here, but thank you everybody for being on. The ice bridge and stuff like that, yeah, over there in Russia and Alaska, right? But you have to recognize and realize that these persons are being hunted because of their beliefs. So they're looking at them from they believe this, they look like this, right? And that's why anybody who's Negroid is going to have to go through the same experience, at least to a certain degree, right? The African was not enslaved originally. Nobody in Africa was actually originally enslaved for chattel slavery. That was initially for the Negro that was in Europe. Once they ran out of them in Europe, you go over where you heard that they're bountiful in Africa, or in places like Israel, same place that we know the Crusades are being fought, and persons all of a sudden that look like us start getting removed. They try to force us into Roman Catholicism, and even with that, once you said you were Roman Catholic, they force you into chattel slavery, right? So it's important. So it's important because you can trace, like we talked about earlier, the migration pattern or the migration of these persons, whether the migration was forced or not, right? We can trace. Sorry for the wind. We can trace St. Croix. Can you guys still hear me? Is it too winded? I can never tell. Can you guys still hear me? It's almost time for us to end anyway. but hopefully you can hear us, right? But you can try to trace Saint Croix, or you can trace us to Saint Croix. You can trace us to Jamaica. You can trace us to Brazil. You can trace us to West Africa. You can trace us to Madagascar. You can trace us to, the list goes on and on and on to Fiji, right? Right. So you can trace us, and you can trace our people, but also, so this is once again, as I said earlier, I made a long talk, and I'm gonna have to do this almost every day, probably in this series. But I'm not here to say that light skin, dark skin should be against each other, or one's better or worse. I want to make it very clear on that. That being said, though, yes, there is something to be said for the fact that persons are in a system worldwide now that is based upon dark skin being less and light skin being better. Right? We just, we have to be at some point. We got to add that into the dialogue. That yes, there are persons who look like me, or darker, or even lighter, but have features that I have. And when they show those features are supposed to show that they are not actually of the same ilk as somebody who doesn't have the same features. And that is something that's problematic, and it's an attack, because the attack is not just on us because of color, right? If that were the case, if all black persons get in and blah, blah. The attack is not just because of our color, it's supposed to be because of our lifestyle. It's because of what we represent. It's because of who we represent, because of who we believe, right? And because of chain of command, if we ever got back to who that is, right? Because of chain of command, if we ever got back to who we're supposed to be before the foundations of the world, before sin, but even after that, right? Even when we're dealing with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. If we ever got back to Genesis 28, realizing that we're supposed to be where heaven meets earth, right? So any attack that can be done on that, not only on you, but even for those around you. See, I'm trying to end, like I said, but I'm gonna be obedient. Look, that's the reason, if we be honest, why we still have these conversations and they have to go so deep. You would think a conversation like that shouldn't even be that deep. But the reason why we have to go through it in a deep level and go through the layers is because that the attack is not just on the so-called black person for being black. The attack is also on the white person that tries to say that the black person should be able to live. And I was going to say live righteously. So no, I'm talking about be able to live. Right? Hear what I'm going to say. I'm going to say it again. You have to recognize this. The attack is not just on the black person because they're black. The attack is also on the so-called white person who just wants the black person to live. Right? Or thinks that they deserve, right, life. And when I say life, I'm not talking about just being alive. I'm talking about like you should be allowed to have your own water and your own food and your own family and your own nation. Is that not what the so-called founding fathers of America fought for? Of course they didn't, for real. They didn't even fight for so-called white persons. But, that's supposedly what the fight was about. Wasn't it? Freedom, justice, equality for all. Unless you're not a person. Right? So it has to be addressed. Be careful about those persons that tell you that they don't see color or things like that. Because the person who's there who doesn't see color is always trying to tell you, you got to be careful. The person who can't see, right? The person who refuses to admit that racism's there, or this is the one really that I was trying to get to. And forgive me, hold on. I got it. Well, I'm gonna finish strong. We're gonna finish strong. The person who says everybody's been enslaved, right? Is the same person that would have allowed slavery to happen in every single thing. And that's why you got to realize chattel slavery and racism and stuff like that is the newest whatever, right? It's the newest of stuff that is coming from that same system. And Babylon, guess what they had? And this is what I want you to even understand. I think we've talked about this before, but even go back. I'm here to tell you, in Kemet, guess who they had as slaves? You, right? In In Assyria, guess who they had as slaves? You, right? In Babylon, guess who they had as slaves? You, right? In Persia, guess who they had as slaves? You. I'm not saying that they had nobody else, but hear what I'm saying. There's a pattern, right? In Greece, guess who they had as slaves? You. In Rome, guess who they had as slaves? You. And now we're in Christian nationalism, right? In Christianity, in white man's burden, the doctrine of discovery, all these things come out of Christianity. And guess who they have as slaves still to this day? You. What I'm saying is that the we're talking about this lie and so messed up that we don't even think, even though there's a guy literally who is the standard for so-called white persons to say why they're better than you. They use the historian that they tell you couldn't have existed because you had no history. You catch all that? Right? I probably should have just said that at the jump. We could have not wasted that much time today. But did you catch that? The person who they use to tell you he actually existed, and they use whatever they need to, and they dismiss whatever they need to say that they are superior. Thank you, babe. I see it's 11:11. Thank you. Right? The same person they see as being superior themselves, and the same person they'll use to say why they're superior, even if he didn't believe that, is the same person that they'll tell you doesn't exist and you shouldn't study him because the lie is supposed to be that we never had a history. They use the historian to tell you why their history is great and you never had one. Can you see now why we're told you should know the law greater than the scribes and the Pharisees? Your Bible was accurate when it said that you should know your history and your culture, your people, your ways, your food. Right? Your Bible was accurate when it told you it was about a nation, so that you don't get so caught up on so-called black that you forget that everybody, that all skin folk ain't kinfolk, not just figuratively, but literally. Somebody else in eugenics taught you that. One drop makes you all the same. And we do that to each other so much. That's unfair. I'll be honest with you, some of you are looking for Israelite values out of non-Israelites, even by blood and DNA. You got to stop. Just because they black and just because they got locks doesn't mean that they have your beliefs. It doesn't mean that they're your family. Right? There are Native American branches of people who come from people who used to eat people. I'm not going to the Candace Owens level of whatever, but that's the truth. That there's some persons that wild out like that. There's persons who used to pull the hearts out of other people because they believed that the spirit that they worship needed it. There are persons that would eat the eyes of their enemy because they wanted to see what their enemy saw. Not only is that physically crazy, that's spiritual craziness that you dismissing. Stuff going on with their soul and literally trying to eat somebody else's soul. I mean, there's wild stuff going on with that, right? So, yeah, you're right, that there's so-called black persons that were Native American. But why are you trying to just integrate with anything that's so-called black? Do you not realize that there's somebody that's so-called black that is out there that's terrible? Don't make the assumption. Don't make the assumption that just because you got the same skin color means that you have the same value. That's the same kind of assumption y'all were making when you thought that just because your family sat down in that first pew every Sunday in the rising, you thought that Sunday morning pew somehow was a reflection of their belief in the Most High. When that was just a seat. That was just something that made them feel better. I'm talking to a brother right now who would tell you the reason why he's dealing with all types of stuff is because he grew up around a whole family of persons who didn't do what they said. You know? So we have to be careful about that stuff. But anyway, so hopefully this gives you a lot of stuff. This is a whole series. So I feel like I danced around a lot of different stuff, but I feel like we had to at least put even Battuta in its place. And then it allowed us to kind of bounce some things around and see some different things that are going on. But yeah, for sure. Thank you for being on. We appreciate you. We'll go ahead and try to do our shout out real quick. It is windy, so I'm not sure how well the shout out's going to go. But thank you for being on. If you want to join us for the shout out, you got to come over to TikTok, Kofi_43. If you want to join us later this evening, you can join us at 8 p.m. New York time on Kofi_42 on TikTok and on YouTube, same place, hashtag Find Kofi. Thank you everybody for being on. I appreciate you so very, very much. I hope that your day continues to go well. And I appreciate your time, energy, effort, especially when it comes to just us becoming better, continuing to create a hashtag, a safe place for each other, and us finishing strong. Hashtag finish strong. There's still time for this year to get yourself together. Also, too, might I just throw this in here? I know I keep saying I'm gone. I promise after this I don't have any other insight or anything. We'll hopefully see you guys tonight. Um, and also, don't forget those who are coming for our classes for grafting sessions and stuff like that. And for those that are coming, we're going to start Tuesday next week. Excuse me. But basically, if I can just say this too, real quick, economy, all this stuff, Republicans feel like they didn't get enough, but at least they got the big beautiful bill or something like that. Democrats upset because they gave up too soon and all this stuff. Now some persons who are MAGA are realizing how racism affects them and all this other stuff for Black MAGA or whatever they want to call themselves and vice versa. You got I saw some guy pop up on my YouTube early this rising on some, he's a Democrat for Trump, so-called black person, all this stuff. And I'm not saying so-called because I'm saying so-called because, that's not our nation. It's not, our nation is not black, even though I have no problem being called a black man, right? Those of you who get it, you get it. That being said, all these weird things that are going on, I just want to say this, peep this real quick. Call it prophetic, call it whatever. It's the truth. Ultimately, all this stuff that's happening, right? All these things that are happening, supposedly the government's going to start back and all these things. Don't go back to same old, same old. I'm going to talk about that this evening. But don't go back to everything as usual. Don't go back to the same as usual, right? Unless your same was kingdom. Don't go back to the same as usual. You've seen now, right? You've seen in 2020. You seen in 2016 what happened. Heck, you seen back when Obama was president, and you got a so-called black person, even though it was the third black person that at least officially exists since Washington. But you seen several black persons in office, and some of you saw it for your generation. Now you can say you had a so-called black president if you want to convene with that, and yet none of your issues were taken care of. If you wanted your issues to be taken care of, you had to become LGBTQ plus. Right? Then after that, you saw somebody come in with tiki torches, and you saw the response to the so-called black president being in, and you saw that it didn't make anything better. Matter of fact, it made things worse. Then after that, you had Biden come in, who was low-key more Republican racist, or more Republican, and I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, I'm just telling you what it is. He was more Republican racist and white supremacy than Trump was, because a lot of you don't know Biden's history, didn't care about it. You just went Democrat, and for you, Democrat's supposed to be a color, right? Somehow Democratic blue erases the red that the Democrats have bled, right? But that being said, you thought that he was going to help you, and then he was racist and lost his mind in the end. Then they just threw you a black person and was like, oh, we don't have anything, shoot, well, at least we can say that the black person ran. They gave you a little Shirley Chisholm, or a little Reverend Jesse Jackson, threw that in there real quick to make everybody go, oh, okay, and we just had Obama, they just got one of them, they'll be happy now. Black man, black woman, maybe she'll get it, maybe she won't. And then Trump came back in and hasn't even been in the year yet officially, even though technically he got voted in around this time last year, but hasn't been in officially. And yet, y'all are losing your minds about this. I'm here to tell you it's the same thing. At some point, our goal has to be get out of the system, right? We might be in the system, but we're not of it. It's like, I'm here to tell you that our belief system can no longer be, it's going to be, it's going to get better tomorrow. It can't be, oh, okay, well, yeah, I even heard a person starting to say, I better not see anybody talking about Thanksgiving food when there's no snaps benefit. Matter of fact, we should just not do Christmas and stuff. It's like, if you were in the way and a follower of the word, you wouldn't even be doing this. You would already be separate from Christmas. And therefore, it wouldn't set you back with Christmas presents or whatever if you're not using your money for Christmas presents, but you use them for the kingdom. It would already help you with Thanksgiving. You're not supposed to be having that ham nowhere, right? You're not supposed to be getting engorged and fat just so you can say you ate up. That's sinful. And right? Oh, well, the Democrats needed to hold on further because now everybody's on Charlemagne the God. And look, Charlemagne the God, he not, once again, not on skin folk to skin folk. Y'all should have caught that already. He's a Wendy Williams lackey, right? Anybody that used, I don't care how much he says he hates you now. Anybody that sat on Wendy Williams' lap as she was doing what she was doing to the black community to make her rise, we already know what time you are, right? But that being said, whatever happened with Charlemagne and all that stuff or whatever, I need you to comprehend. He's uninformed, more than likely, and can't admit that he was ill-informed and uninformed, and therefore he needs to go ahead and make fun of the OGs. But that's the same thing that so-called black persons coming up have been doing. He was so busy calling out Roland Martin because Roland Martin is on the left. It won't stop being on the left. That he won't admit to you that he's getting paid by the left during all the stuff going on, showing up on the Daily Show. You see what I'm saying? Like, so this is the same black person, so-called black person, that they roll out in front of you every time during this time of year. Right? And it's going to get strong again next year because they need those Senate votes. Right? It's going to be strong again the year after that. And then, right, the year after that is when they're going to start either trying to push Trump again for president or trying to push J.D. Vance or whoever they got. Right? Seems like, allegedly, I'm not even sure how I feel about this, but allegedly, they're even trying to get Charlie Kirk's wife with J.D. Vance, or at least they're shopping it around to see what persons would do if they actually go through with it. Showing you how much she cared about Charlie Kirk, who swore up and down that he loved and took care of his family and da da. I'm just saying it's going to be the same thing. So prayerfully, we got our eyes open, right? And I mean that, prayerfully, we got our eyes open with that, and we realize and recognize it's going to be the same thing. So if you are going back into this business as usual, well, I'm just going to wait for the next vote. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that, my SNAP benefit, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to, no. All this, I've seen so much great stuff. Like, make that your normalcy. All of a sudden, everybody and their mama they can feed their community. Why couldn't we do that before Trump was in office? The answer is we could have. We should have. Right? I see an all-the-time person, persons need help with this. Yeah, during every recession, there's always a chance to be able to make something because persons need help with something that they normally don't need. What can you do? Right? Like, at this moment in time where we are, what will we do? Will we go back to the same thing? Okay, well, the government's supposed to reopen. We'll just hope for another handout. And even those that are in the government, making that great government bread, some of you. If you doing the thing, then question, what are you doing to save up? Right? If you are righteous, you're supposed to take care of your children's children. The wealth of the wicked should be laid up for the just. But that's only for those who have a mind to take care of their children's children. Are you setting aside what you need to ensure that your children's children will have? Think different than what just happened. This was this was a whole thing. It's another testing thing. They tested you in 2020 to see if you would leave the house. They tested you to see if you give up your weapons. Right? They tested you to see if you would do whatever it takes to get whatever medication they spoon feed you. They tested you and didn't even tell you. In Tuskegee, and in Ohio, in Alabama, Ohio. I'm just saying, it's an opportunity for you to realize that you can't do the same old, same old. If we keep saying what Yah says keeps happening, maybe we should trust him. All right, I'm done. Y'all see I can keep on going and going and going on this or whatever. I appreciate y'all. We'll be back on with the series tomorrow. I'll see you guys this evening. And, just keep looking for the announcements and everything to keep on popping up. Text trains to keep on being utilized. Children, we're going to start at least with the Kung Fu with everybody on next week. And that's all that I have. So thank you again. Feel free to give any likes, shares, subscriptions, hit the notification tabs. Those who give donation, all that, we appreciate you. We give our honor and praise to the Most High. We give our honor and praise to him for my wife, the Honorable Maya. Liz would like to say able to be honored. To the ministerial staff, moderators, SOC, Lottie Di, and everybody, we thank you so much. We appreciate you. Numbers are starting to get back up after the first time of me being gone for a little while. We're starting to creep back up again, slowly but surely. It's kind of a roller coaster, but we're gonna keep on taking it and trusting Yah. And we hope to see you guys soon. So, thank you again. We appreciate you. We honor you. This Saturday is the 15th. So this Saturday is the men's meeting. So we'll be having a men's meeting. We should be ending the study of our book on the 5 love languages, and hopefully you'll get that. If you'd like to be part of anything we're doing at SOC, including those who are coming in as new members at this time and all that stuff, once again, get in contact with somebody. We'll reach out to you best we can, as soon as we can, and we'll get you information. But we'll try to do the shout out for you. The music might not be as loud as it normally is, but hopefully it's loud enough for you guys to hear. We thank you again. We appreciate you. Thanks for helping us to be a hashtag a safe place. And as always, beloved, remember that you are loved. You're necessary. You're majestic. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. And you, which is all of us working together, will be the reason why people who are in this system no longer have to be of it. Shalom. Care. Peace. Thank you for being on again.